But these are a little different from what we now know as crime fiction. We have, these have a bit of digressions on morality, a bit of a huge cast of characters. Crime fiction now, as we know, it is very tightly written. There's not much of moralization, sermonization. Police procedurals are very, very focused to the point of precision on the actual detection of the crime. But in medieval England, we also had crime. There's a very famous personality in medieval England who went about with his band of merry men in the forests of Sherwood, committing all sorts of crimes. These are the tales of Robin Hood. I'm sure we've all heard of it, we've seen the series. But were there murders? Yes, there were murders. Were there investigations? No, there were no investigations because everyone knew it was Robin Hood doing it. Can we call it crime fiction? Not really, perhaps. But there was another time, at the same time, when the Robin Hood stories began getting written about, circa 1377 or so, William Langland's poem, The Vision of Piers Plowman, was the first to mention the Robin Hood stories in medieval England. A couple of centuries later, we had something called the rope pamphlet. Okay, this was writing which we would now call pulp fiction. It was meant to scandalize the genteel folk living in London about tales about how dissolute the ropes are in the streets of London, how they can murder you, cut your throat, come into your house, and do all sorts of wild things to you and your families. This was very, very popular in the Tudor and Stuart England. But later, we have Voltaire's Zadig, written in 1748, which is considered an earliest example of detective fiction. In around the 1860s, we had something called the sensation novel, which burst on the scene. This was influenced by the earlier Gothic writing, which was very popular, and something called the Newgate novel, which I spoke about, the rogue fiction, which was about the dissoluteness of London's roads. There was something called the Penny Dreadful. These are little pamphlets printed on very cheap paper as soon as the printing press came out. Penny Dreadful, they cost a penny. They had dreadful stories. That's how they call why they call the Penny Dreadfuls. What is considered the first ever actual predecessor of modern crime fiction is E.T.A. Hoffman's 1819 novella called Mademoiselle de Scuderi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, so please forgive me if I'm not. Also, Thomas Skinner Stur's Anonymous Richmond, Stories of Life of a Bow Street Officer. This was published in 1827. But this doesn't get so much credit as someone we all know and love, Edgar Allan Poe's See Auguste Dupin. This detective created by Edgar Allan Poe was the predecessor to another detective written by another man whom we all love and have all read, I can say that without any iota of a doubt. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. So, with his Dupin stories, Poe provided the framework for the classic detective novel. And he also introduced in his stories an unnamed companion, who then in Conan Doyle's books became, who did he become? The unnamed narrator. He became a named narrator in Sherlock Holmes stories, who was also Sherlock Holmes' companion and guide. Dr. Watson, yes. Then there's Wilkie Collins' epistolary novel called The Woman in White, published in 1860, which is also a crime story, but his novel The Moonstone, which was published in 1868, is considered a masterpiece, of course, and it set into place something that became very popular later with a novelist that Dr. Poole said, thanks dear Agatha, to. He established the entire scenario of the English country house, the locked room, the cozy mystery, the murder, the crime. So this came about with Wilkie Collins' book, The Moonstone. So there's lots and lots of stuff, but I think we don't have that much time. While there were plenty of whodunits written by Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, cozy mysteries set in English country houses, the amateur detective, the detectives created by the male fiction writers of that time, a little later, who then went into what is called the hard-boiled detective fiction, or the noir fiction, as Dr. Poe mentioned. Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, Jonathan Latimer, Mickey Spillane, Earl Stanley Gardner, all of these authors we've read in our early days. Closer? Yeah. So we had the male private investigator, the hard-boiled detective. We had the military veteran. So this entire phase of noir and hard-boiled writing happened. Then we had the police procedural. What emerged with the Cold War era was the spy thriller. I'm sure every one of us has read the spy thrillers, and they were immensely popular at that point of time. Frederick Fawcett's Day of the Jackal was not a spy thriller, it was crime. The Spy Who Loved Me. There's so many spy thrillers that were out there. But the end of the Cold War led to the end of the spy thriller. And corporate America led to the emergence of the courtroom drama, of corporate drama. A lot of legal thrillers began coming up at this point of time. This is 1980s. We had Scott Turow, who was a lawyer himself, who gave up law to become a writer and wrote Presumed Innocent, which became a big hit. And of course, we've had all kinds of new genres emerging since then. More contemporary fiction has had psychological thrillers. I'm guilty of writing one of them too. So has read one of them, Missing, Presumed Dead. I've written the horror thriller as well, More Things in Heaven. I've written cozy mysteries, the Kitty Bati murder, which is there. So, jack of all trades. But right now what we're seeing is the domestic thriller. We've seen women writing thrillers which are very dark grim. We've seen Gone Girl. We've seen The Girl on the Train, Paula Hawkins' books. And the voice of these narrators is unreliable. It's a very different kind of voice from the, the very precise detective who was going about things methodically in our detective fiction. We've had Scandinavian noir, which has become very popular in recent times. We've had Joe Nesbo, Stieg Larsson, who've written these very dark, chilling books and very gruesome and graphic books as well. Of course, in India, we've had detective fiction for the longest time. Everybody knows Satyajit Ray and Feluda series. We've had Sharadindu Bandyopadhyay with Byomkesh Bakshi. Now we've had mythofiction with Ashwin Sanghi. We have Anita Nair writing a beautiful detective stories. Corporate crime, Ravi Subramanian writes, drawing from his experience as a banker. True crime, we have Hussain Zaidi, who does wonderful true crime. Vish Taneja also does corporate thrillers. What now? I know I was asked to talk about the history of crime thrillers, but what now? Where does the crime thriller go from here? Or has it already gone where it has to go? We have science fiction, which is doing the work of crime thrillers. We have Altered Carbon, which talks about immortality and what depravity mankind can go to if they have immortality. We have the movie Blade Runner, Two Androids, People of Electric Sheep. What happens if you make cyborgs? What do they come to crimes? Crime fiction is going to uncharted territory now. I can't wait to see how devious the human mind can now get with artificial intelligence, with virtual reality, with cryptocurrency. I'm sure it will be an exciting time for all of us readers now. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Carrying the discussion further, I would like Dr. Neha to elaborate on the point that why crime, mystery and thriller novels continue to be so popular among the readers. Other than romance, I think crime is the really selling. So, can you?
Yes. Thank you so much for the question, and among all the panelists here, I think I have the easiest question to answer, which is that crime fiction is so popular. We've heard all of our panelists, as Dr. Naqvi said, that crime fiction is something that grows on us since our childhood. Nobody who's a book nerd has not read a crime thriller, definitely. And then, as Dr. Kapoor mentioned, that this is a genre which has its subgenres and its own classification. No doubt it's so popular. And as Kiran said about the history, that this genre is taking place from centuries ago, and today we are still exploring new genres and new subplots. There is no doubt, and I read it somewhere which I found so resonating, that crime fiction can be considered like this Roman arch bridge. Each plot and subplot is like a brick in the bridge. If you take one brick out of the bridge, the whole bridge is going to come stalling down. And that really puts the reader into this gripping action, a gripping conversation with the novel, I should say. You know, when I read the crime novels and when I think about the crime thrillers, I think it has a cause and an effect. A plot gives you certain kind of a drama that creates a cause. That cause creates an effect. And there is a panorama of these cause and effects. And I think this keeps the subliminal action, you know, this kind of subliminal action keeps the readers very engaged and intact in the novel. Of course, all of us know about the crime fictions which involve who done it. I mean, when I read a novel, I want to know who did this. Until the end, it doesn't satisfy. You cannot put the book down until you know who did this. We, of course, want justice to be done and the crook to be, you know, given its word. But then, you know, the more irresistible ones are the stories which talk about why done it. That means we want to know the intention behind the person who did this crime. Or the detective who just solved this mystery. Now those are irresistible. And for me, as you know, I have been reading crime fictions, but not so much, but howsoever I've read these crime fictions, I realize that they are tight, they are gripping, they are focused. So much so that sometimes you believe that these stories are happening in your next room. And I think that gives crime fiction the kind of popularity it rightly deserves, and rightly as the opening of this session. Thank you so much. Taking the discussion forward, I first congratulate both the authors sitting on our panel for writing wonderful books and for the benefit of the audience. I'll first ask Dr. Kapoor, your book, The Honeymoon, is a mystery, you know, with scuba diving as its backdrop. So can you please tell us, you know, how and where did this idea conceive?
First, I will say that this book belongs as much to me as to my wife and partner in crime, Dr. Neelkamal Kapoor. She went to attend a conference in Caribbean islands, famous for water sports. Her colleague narrated to her several scuba incidents. Coming back, she shared these with me. The material was perfect for a mystery. So then I sat down and I developed the story arc, then the characters, their journey, their their motives, and finally the rationale behind their actions. We went to Maldives and stayed in an overwater villa. So the sea, the beaches, the buildings all became a part of this book. So this was how the book actually was conceived, and then it went into writing and then got published.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kapoor. Now, one more question. You know, as you presented to all of us the different classifications, the genres and sub-genres of crime fiction, so where do you place The Honeymoon?
This, as I mentioned, this is basically a scientific mystery, because medical forensics have been used in catching the culprit. The case gets solved only when the final postmortem report comes. And further than this, I can't tell you, because then that really reveals the plot. But yes, other than that, there's social drama, there's family problems, all add up, love triangle. All the parts are there which have been tied together, and finally the case gets cracked when the PM findings are revealed.
Thank you so much. Now
I will ask you, Kiran Mandralji, tell us about your book, More Things in Heaven and Earth.
So, More Things in Heaven and Earth is a paranormal thriller. There is a crime, there's a death. So that's a book which has we don't know whether it's a murder or it's a natural death, so I can't give that away. And the book is basically about grief and loss and widowhood and dealing with it. It's quite an emotional book. It's centers around a woman who is widowed at a very young age and how she's dealing with the sudden unexpected death of her husband. But having said that, there is also behind us the Kitty murder, which is a cozy mystery. It's about a woman who lives in a gated community, and there is a sudden death in a kitty party group, and of course this is a comic mystery, so she has to get to the heart of it because she's a very nosy person, and that means infiltrating a kitty group. So these are two very different kinds of books that I have written. One is very dark and noir, and this is a very light and comic one.
Okay, if you permit me, it's like deviation from the questionnaire. Tell us something about your other book, Missing Presumed Dead.
That's the one you read, sir, right? So that's a thriller. I wouldn't call it a thriller. It's a noir book. It's psychological. It's about a woman who has mental health issues, a marriage which is dysfunctional. I have tried in that book to explore both the disintegration of a marriage. I think Smita's right here. We discussed Missing Presumed Dead the last time we were here. The disintegration of a marriage when coupled with a woman's mental health issues and how it affects not just her but the entire family, and why we need to prioritize mental health. It's a book that has multiple layers to it, and I haven't tried to preach in this book. I've just told the story as it is of what happens.
Incidentally, the law waits for 7 years for a missing person to be recovered before being pronounced dead. Next, I will address my question to both of you, Dr. Kapoor and Kiran Mandral. What are the processes you follow when you sit for writing a book?
That's difficult to answer because with each book it's a different process, but I can divide it into two basic. First, sometimes first I get an idea which gives me an opening. Then I develop the narrative forwards and finally the climax. At other times, I get an idea which gives me the ending, and then I develop the narrative forwards and finally the opening. So it's both ways. Sometimes I begin with the opening and sometimes with the ending. If you ask my opinion, I find the second type of writing more impactful and easier also, because when you know the ending, most of the books, if you have a strong and unexpected ending, that has a more impactful thing on the readers. Because no one really reads a book for its opening or its middle. It's the end that actually matters, how you end your book. So this is the basic process. Either beginning, sometimes it is with the opening idea or sometimes with the end. But I also focus on not using really difficult words, because I don't want to discombobulate my readers, confuse my readers by using fancy stuff like denizens instead of citizens, or puissant instead of powerful. So I write the way I speak, which is what I have learned through various people who are into writing. They always advised me when I was beginning as my writing journey, that use the language you actually use in your day-to-day conversations. That will connect with the reader more. This is the basic process which I follow while writing.
Thank you. You, please.
So that's a very difficult question, sir, because we have two kinds of writers. We have plotters and we have pansters. Now, what are plotters and what are pansters? Plotters are the ones who will plot every single thing from, the character graph, the opening scene, right to the end. And when they write, it is a fill-in-the-blanks kind of a situation. In some novels, of course, you have to be plotters because they're detective fiction or crime fiction. You can't let the plot run away everywhere and then sit down redoing it. And then there are the pansters, who start writing with an idea or a character and then develop the plot as it goes along. How do I write? I write both ways, to be honest. There are some novels which I have plotted, and there are some novels which I have no clue what the characters were going to do, how they were going to turn out, and they surprised me. So the ones that I have plotted have been very convenient to write, because there's no going back and forth and agonizing, and you know what the end is. As Dr. Kapoor said, the end is very important, and that's something I believe as well. But having said that, being a panster is creatively much more satisfying. When I take the germ of a character, when a character comes to me like Julia McNally in The Face at the Window, or Aisha Thakur in Missing Presumed Dead, or Kamla Malik in More Things in Heaven and Earth, these are books that were not plotted. These are books that started with the character. And these are the books where the character took me on the journey of their own, and they did things that I never ever imagined that they would do. And it is not very time efficient, let me tell you. So I don't recommend it.
Beautifully explained. You have to go for another round. Dr. Kapoor first. What are the essentials of a good crime fiction?
Crime fiction, the logic and analytics, they are very important to this genre. The situations should be plausible, not implausible. Then the narrative should have, as we have been talking, should have twists and turns. The story cannot, the things should actually get complicated with each clue. Other than that, a good crime novel should also, the cover-ups are very important, what we call red herrings. The culprit tries to throw the investigative agencies off balance. He wants to confuse them. And another important thing is motive. That's the crux. If there has to be a very strong motive for committing a crime. This, I think Dr. Naqvi will agree, because if there is no motive, how will you catch the culprit? How will you catch the murderer or whatever? So motive is again of utmost importance, and that should be a very strong and logical. Yes, he has done it because this was what he had, this problem or this anguish. Other than that, the suspense naturally should be maintained till the very end. And I personally like those books and those serials and everything where everything is neatly tied up at the end. There should be no loose ends. You are confused why this person has been acting like this, or probably these days the trend of seasons has come. That is why several things are left unexplained. But that leaves the reader or the viewer dissatisfied. So all the things preferably should be tied up by the time the book ends.
From my professional experience, I can tell you that there are sometimes crimes without motives also. Anyway, thank you for elaborating on that.
So are you able to catch them?
Yes, definitely. And they only say that they have no motive. The same question goes for you, Kiran Mandralji. What do you think are the essentials of good crime fiction?
So, I think the main thing about good crime fiction is pace. If the book is such that you can't put it down, and the pace is metered out so well by the author that you keep going to one cliffhanger after another, then that's good crime fiction. Of course, there is motive, as Dr. Kapoor said. Sometimes you don't have motives. You have Hannibal Lecter who ate a census taker's liver with fava beans because he just felt like it. So there's no motive to that, but it was a crime. So, or there's a talented Mr. Ripley who just doesn't have an actual motive, but just wants to climb up the social ladder. So there's no vengeance or anything. He's just psychopathically criminal. So there's also that. There's character which is important, there's space which is important, there's atmosphere, how you build your atmosphere. It depends completely on the subgenre. If it's a police procedural, your forensics have to be in place and perfect tomorrow. Nobody, or if it's a legal thriller, you have to know your law of the place in which your plot is set. I think all these little things add up, and of course there are the little tropes. You have Chekhov's axe. For instance, if you bring something in at the start of a show, if you have an axe on the wall, that axe in the scene one, then that axe has to come in place somewhere at the end of the story so that the reader knows that the axe was not placed in vain. So all these things have to fall into place beautifully for a good crime thriller.
Thank you so much. Now, as a reader, since I get a chance to ask the authors right from the horse's mouth that how is the process of writing these crime fictions? So I want to ask to both of you all that, I mean, are your books plot-driven or character-driven? I mean, that's a difficult question, but please solve it for us. Solve this mystery for us. Dr. Kapoor, you can go first.
I'll keep this answer brief because, see, ideally it should be a mix of both. The plot is also important, and characters are also to be, people should be able to identify with them. But of late I have realized that it is the characters which really remain with the readers. See that most of you must have watched Money Heist. So I remember the professor, I remember Tokyo, Nairobi, Berlin, Denver, Arturo, but the plot has already started to become fuzzy. I have started forgetting the details. But the traits and how the professor walked, how Nairobi would react to this situation, or what was that made Tokyo so reckless in such some things. So characters, I think, are more important or better remembered, but basic plot should always be right.
Right. And what about you, Kiran? Is it plot or character which takes the lead?
I gave a long answer to that earlier. But yeah, it depends completely on the kind of book. So if you're writing literary fiction, it's character. If you're writing a thriller, it has to be plot and pace. So it completely depends on your writing style and the kind of book you're writing and how you take it forward.
I'll take another question in this continuation. That what are your thoughts and how do you explore female protagonists in a crime fiction? I mean, that you do beautifully with your books, and how do you do that?
Thank you so much. I think there was something I read about how Philip Marlowe's detectives would be, if you think of Humphrey Bogart in these times, he would be very ill-placed in a Gone Girl or in a Girl on the Train, the Woman on the Train. Because these are very internal books. These are books which dwell from the mind of the character, and female protagonists give you more scope because they internalize things. A female writer, I wouldn't like to say writer because Agatha Christie has written the female detective as brilliantly as she's written the male detective. But I think it's more internal, it's more about how you feel than what you see and how you commit the crime. It is the entire sensation of why and how you are experiencing it rather than what is happening before you. So that's the primary difference, I think.
Thank you so much for this answer. Now to Dr. Kapoor, my question to you would be, I mean, we know this is a unique scuba mystery that you've written, a murder mystery. What are you planning to write next? Is there a book in pipeline?
It was out of pipeline, but not delivered to the publisher. It's titled She. There are 4 murders. Because Abhilash told me, why have you just restricted yourself to 1 murder in the honeymoon? So I went overboard. I said this time I'll manage with 4. So there are 4 murders.
No, don't be responsible for that murder.
So there are 4 murders, but the modus operandi is the same. It involves a beautiful woman, split radial arteries, and 6 alphabets ABERSU soaked in victim's blood. What do they mean? The police is not able to find her because she doesn't exist. It's a saga dripping with love, lust, abuse, suspense, intrigue, and friendship. So this will come out in another 6 months.
Wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, if you allow me, I would like to open the round for the audience as well.
Yeah, before that, I had one question with my discussants each.
Sure, sir.
First, Dr. Naqvi said we have a murder somewhere today. So how the police actually proceeds? We keep writing fiction and all that, but you are actually doing it.
Fine. Let me explain in very brief and something which everybody will be able to relate to. There has to be an information received by the police, whoever informs. And this is registered as an unnatural death case. CRPC provisions 174 to 176 describes in detail how do you go about that. So once you have an unnatural death information, you visit this spot, you issue subpoena or summons for witnesses. In presence of witness, you examine the place, the body, conduct a panchanama. Then after that, you can call your forensics team to the spot, the photos, videos and everything. And then afterwards, you have those 5 witnesses, and after the panchanama is drawn, you send the body to post-mortem, mortuary. Post-mortem is basically done for finding out the cause of death, time since death and mode of death. So it gives you an impression whether the death was a natural death, was a homicidal death, a suicidal death, or in between, whatever. So once you receive the post-mortem report, and based on that, if a crime is made out with other corroborative evidences, you register a crime of section 302 IPC. And this investigation then starts again in the CRPC provisions 154 till 173. It involves all these steps. In between, the more important step is the scientific evidence collection, because the whole investigation is a process of collection of evidence so that it can be brought before the competent magistrate court to be prosecuted or discharged as is the case. I hope this suffices.
Thank you, Dr. Naqvi. It was very comprehensive as well as very well explained in simple words. Because most of us do, and people read crime novels, but the actual procedures are still not very clear to us. I would like to ask Dr. Neha, see, in general fiction, strong word choices and literary devices, they play an important role in making the narrative more impactful and thrilling. But what do you feel? Do crime writing also, does it need literary devices and strong word choices?
Just for the benefit, I should say, first, before I commit any crime here, for the novel purists, I'm an IS officer, not a novelist, so I can answer it from a perspective of a keen reader. So I think, words are angry for an author. Of course, they should have meaning, they should have a context. You cannot use a through English for a young adult, and neither you can use a word like a wonky in a legal thriller. I mean, that takes away from the context, the soul of the book that you are writing and the reader is reading. As you said, words are as important for any novel, a piece of prose or poetry as for a crime fiction. But I feel for crime fiction, it's even more important because for a crime fiction, it seems as if the picturization, the humanism that the words, woven words actually interplay, they appear as if they're happening in the next room. And I think that really sums up the importance of words which need to be, of course, important and economical at the same time. So this is a very brief understanding of what I have for the words. Thank you.
Continuing with your questioning, who are your favorite crime authors, crime writers?
Okay, for me, a lot of my childhood was with Agatha Christie. I mean, that's how I think young book nerds are. We feel as if, the author is speaking to us. And that's how you feel important, by the way, just looking at the book itself. And so I used to find the books really, really interesting, like any other crime, lover. After that, I think among the Indian authors, it's not that discussed, but I think I really enjoyed The Calcutta Chromosome by Amitabh Ghosh, which is a beautiful thriller. And then, of course, all of us would have seen The Sacred Games, but when I actually wanted to read it, it's a humongous book to read. But it's at the same time, you cannot put it down. And I think that is the beauty of crime thrillers, that howsoever big, huge they are, you cannot put them down. That's for me.
Three of your favorite crime writers that we have.
See, it has been changing as I was growing. So, very long back, I liked the novel Day of the Jackal, that is Frederick Forsyth. Then I moved on to Robert Ludlum, and I really very much like this series made as films, Born Identity, and I have been reading a lot of Alistair MacLean and Chase also, Hadley Chase also. And in Hindi also I have been reading some Pathak and then Urdu, as you said, Ibn Safi and all those. So it keeps on changing.
There's one Colonel Ranjit also.
Yeah, Colonel Ranjit also, long.
Okay, so that was an intensifying discussion. The round is open for the audience. If you have some questions here, a man right there, please get the microphone.
I don't need mic. I can talk.
Please go ahead.
Okay, right. May I have liberty to talk to Dr. Kapoor that can I give you a topic that being a medical person, it will be easy for you to write on the corona because a lot of gunja has taken place in the various hospitals. It is in-house things you can write better. You know what?
Actually, fiction, Byron and all those books and even films which actually depict the corona scenario very closely have already been made. But yes, this is a good idea.
That is a Wuhan theory and all those bad theory and all various theories has come out in the
this could be an interesting take on the pandemic.
Thank you.
Second question.
मेरा सवाल डॉक्टर कपूर के लिए है कि आप इतनी इंस्पायरिंग पेरेंटिंग की किताब लिखते लिखते मर्डर मिस्ट्री तक कैसे पहुंचे, इसकी मिस्ट्री सॉल्व करवाइए।
भैया बच्चे बड़े हो गए वो they won't take tips from me now. I take tips from them. So
ये मर्डर मिस्ट्री का इंस्पिरेशन भी बच्चों ने ही दिया है आपको लिखने के लिए.
ये तो पार्टनर इन क्राइम ने दिया है.
I guess any more questions? Last, yes. Please bring the mic to lady here.
I wanted to ask a question from Kiran because I've read your books, but also anybody else. How important is humor in crime fiction? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, humor is important in every book. But and do you think about it consciously, or does it just seep in because it's part of your character?
So, Shinjini, you've read Reluctant Detective and you've read The Kitty Party Murder. I don't know if you've read the darker books. They're completely different voices. So humor does come in those two books because my character, K. Mehra, is a regular everyday schoolgate mom, and I can't put her in very dark situations. The whole scenario of her gateway suburban complex and all the shenanigans that go with it makes for a very humorous situation. And having said that, I have enjoyed reading humorous detective fiction. There was something called Dangerous Davies. I don't know if anyone has read it. There were just 3 books with a detective called Dangerous Davies. And I have never laughed so hard in my life while he was finding dead bodies and cleaning out canals and getting murders. So I think that sort of stayed with me, that you can write funny and you can write dead bodies at the same time. And of course you have Alexander McCall Smith, who has written beautifully. So I think these are the inspirations I draw from.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much, Pradeep ji, Kiran ji, Nakvi ji and Neha ji for that intensifying discussion. And now I would like to invite one of the founding members of the Society for Culture and Environment, Mr. Vilash Khandekar ji, to felicitate the authors and the discussants here. And और मैं चाहूँगा हम सब तालियों के साथ जी हाँ. A painting, a beautiful painting based on the tribal art created by Padma Shri Gauri Bai ji. A beautiful painting as a token of love, respect and gratitude from the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival to our authors, Dr. Pradeep Kapoor ji and Kiran Mangal ji. Murder mystery titled as The Unknown. And here are the mugs for our wonderful discussants for the session. Nadvi Sahab and Neha ji. जी तालियां बरकरार होनी चाहिए, जोरदार होनी चाहिए. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for that wonderful discussion. Thank you so much. Great session, and I'm sure बाद के भी आपके सर में काफ़ी सवाल होंगे तो बाहर ज़रूर आप डिस्कस कर सकते हैं. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. And without any further delay, we are going to begin with the third session of this evening. This session is certainly going to give you goosebumps. देवी और सज्जनों, जो सरहद पे लड़ते हैं वो खुद के लिए नहीं, इस देश के लिए लड़ते हैं. और जब वो इस देश के लिए शहीद होते हैं तो हर एक देशवासी का कर्तव्य होता है कि हम उन्हें सदैव याद रखें, उनकी बहादुरी को याद रखें.
So there's a question for the audience. because we are dealing with the crime and mystery and murder and death, he has a quick question only for the audience, not for the panelists, because I'm sure the panelists know the answer. This book, written by a Swedish novelist, was published after the novelist died in 2005. It became a global bestseller and was made into a famous film. Name the author and the book, and you get a book as a prize. Whoever answers first.
Any guesses?
Any guesses? No, not the authors, but it has to be the audience. Audience? That's it. Come and claim your prize. So you get a copy of Bartul Singh's Bhopal Nama. What's your name? Akshay from? Okay, भैया इनकी फोटो ले लीजिए. Receiving the prize, let me come forward. Come. Anchor can also come as a witness. Good. So the book is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, written by Stieg Larsson.
देर से आए पर दुरुस्त है. बढ़िया, सही जवाब. जी हाँ. तो मैं आपको बता रहा था कि कैसे जब सरहद पे कोई शहीद होता है तो हर एक देशवासी का कर्तव्य बन जाता है कि उनकी बहादुरी को, उनके शौर्य को हम याद रखें और सदैव याद करते जाएं. This session, ladies and gentlemen, is titled as The Kargil Gallantry of Late Captain Manoj Pandey Ji, PVC Param Veer Chakra, A Human Story. And as the author, we have Martyr's classmate and chronicler, Shri Pavan Mishra Ji, who is going to be in conversation with Brigadier Sanjay Agrawal Ji. मैं चाहूँगा हम जोरदार तालियों के साथ स्वागत करें हमारे author और discussion का. Pavan Mishra Ji is center head of Vidya Mandir classes Lucknow. He is a senior faculty for IIT NEET with experience of 20 long years. He is MSc Physics with NET CSIR. He is ex-physics faculty of Acharya Narendra Dev College, New Delhi, Delhi University. He is also the ex-general body member of Rajdhani College, Delhi University. His book is titled as The Hero of Batalik, which is the biography of late Captain Manoj Kumar Pandey Ji. Pavan Ji was amongst the top for this session. We are delighted to have the one and only Brigadier Sanjay Agrawal Ji, who is also the founding member of Society for Culture and Environment. He is the former security advisor to the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, advisor to Government of Seychelles, a country east of Africa, advisor to the National Highways Authority of India, and president of the Services Selection Board, Ministry of Defence, Government of India. He is also a master trainer in soft skills with ICI, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He speaks on the television on international geopolitics, security issues, and more. Also, you will be delighted to know that the author of the book and Brigadier Sanjay Agrawal Ji both happen to be the schoolmates of Captain Manoj Pandey Ji. And UP Sainik School, Lucknow, happens to be their common alma mater. We can never get a better pair to discuss about the bravery and chivalry of late Captain Manoj Pandey Ji. I request the gentleman to please unveil the conversation.
उपस्थित सभी मान्यवर, आप सबको यहाँ पर अपना बहुमूल्य समय देने के लिए धन्यवाद. मैं ब्रिगेडियर संजय अग्रवाल, लेखक पवन मिश्रा जी, और जिसके ऊपर इन्होंने किताब लिखी है कैप्टन मनोज पांडे परमवीर चक्र, हम तीनों एक ही स्कूल के हैं. ये मुझसे स्कूल में 20 साल प्लस बाद आए थे और मुझे बड़ी खुशी है कि मेरे अनुग्रह पे हमारे स्कूल के मुझसे भी सीनियर, मैं स्कूल में था 1970 से 74 तक। आज यहाँ उपस्थित हैं इसी रंग महल में बहुत सारे लोग। मैं आपसे निवेदन करूंगा कि सिर्फ अपना नाम और कब से कब तक आप स्कूल में थे, 4-5 लोग जो मुझे दिख रहे हैं, ये बता दीजिए। त्यागी सर, प्लीज स्टार्ट।
भोपाल में आई थिंक सबसे वरिष्ठ शायद मैं ही हूँ। मैंने स्कूल ज्वाइन किया था 1962 में।
अपना नाम बता दें प्लीज।
मेरा कर्नल महेंद्र कुमार त्यागी।
कर्नल महेंद्र कुमार त्यागी 1962 में, और हमारे स्कूल के नाम को कैप्टन मनोज पांडे से प्रीफिक्स किया गया जब इनको परमवीर चक्र मिल गया। थैंक यू। नेक्स्ट प्लीज। 1962 से 1967। यस।
MS खरे 1969 to 74।
और आप भोपाल के ही परमानेंट रहने वाले हैं और यहाँ के शासन का एक हिस्सा रहे हैं। नेक्स्ट प्लीज।
आई एम ग्रुप कैप्टन AK उपाध्याय, presently serving as director NCC for Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. I was in school from 1980 to 1984.
Thank you, Alan.
Good evening, everybody. I am Sudhanshu Nautiyal, school number 882. I was there from 79 to 85, and presently I am DIG SSB Academy Bhopal. Thank you.
Excellent, Nautiyal.
Good evening, everyone. I am S.C. Pandey. I was in school from 69 to 73. Thank you.
No, you were in school from 1969 till 73. Yes. So with that as a background, let me start. Our author, how much time do you think he took to write this book? बड़े तफसील से लिखी है इन्होंने। 10 साल। मन हट गया, कोई समस्याएं आ गई, 10 साल। और इनको प्रेरणा अल्टीमेटली किसने दी? कैप्टन मनोज पांडे की माँ ने, जिन्होंने अपना बेटा खोया था। और जब उन्होंने पूछा इनसे 8-9 साल बाद कि बेटा तुम वो किताब लिख रहे थे, कहाँ पहुँचे, तब इनके अंदर वो एक जुनून जागा और उन्होंने वो किताब लिखी। दूसरी बात मैं ये बता दूं कि इसके कंटेंट्स पेज में अगर आप देखें तो 30 पन्नों में केवल पत्रावली है। ये दोनों क्लासमेट्स थे, कैप्टन मनोज पांडे, परमवीर चक्र और पवन मिश्रा। तो 1993 से अगले 4-5 साल जो इनकी चिट्ठियां चली, दैट वाज द डेज ऑफ स्नेल मेल, लेडीज एंड जेंटलमैन। देयर वाज नो व्हाट्सएप एंड नो इंटरनेट। और वो कहीं बर्फाने इलाके में बैठा हुआ इनको चिट्ठी लिख रहा है, इंक्लूडिंग कि यार उस लड़की से शादी होनी थी, ये हो गया, वो सब इन्होंने किताब में चिट्ठियों की फोटो और ट्रांसक्रिप्ट दी है। दिस इज अ वेरी ह्यूमन इंटरेस्ट स्टोरी जो कि आज के यूथ को, और मैं इनसे वही सवाल जवाब करूंगा, क्या हुआ। और इस किताब के अंदर उन्होंने शुरू में ही जो एक्चुअल असॉल्ट था उसका विवरण किया है। उसमें एक चीज़ उन्होंने लिखी है जो कि सिविलियन दिमाग में अनोखी लगती है। हम कहा अच्छा हाँ ये तो इनको अनोखी लगेगी। क्या? हम लोग रूटीनली, आई हैव ऑल्सो बीन डिक्लेयर्ड डेड इन वॉर, आई हैव बीन शॉट नंबर ऑफ टाइम्स, आई एम अ वॉर वुंडेड, सो आई एम वेरी ग्रेटफुल कि मेरी बीवी का सिंदूर अभी तक बरकरार है। द पॉइंट इज वी हैव टू मूव टू गेट द फायर ऑन टू अस, टू गेट द एनिमी टू रिवील हिज पोजिशन सो दैट वी कैन फायर एंड किल हिम। दिस इज समथिंग Pawan, as a civilian author, has rightly brought out in his book. Now, I want to ask you, Pawan, you will cover it in your unique way. पहले तो ऑडियंस को ये बताइए, कैप्टन मनोज पांडे के व्यक्ति को, you know, flesh the skeleton. What was he? Was he a scholar? Was he a warrior? Was he a sportsman? Was he hot-headed? Or was he samtal, sheetal swabhav? Was he religious? Was he spiritual? कैप्टन मनोज पांडे, जो हम लोग उनको नहीं जानते, उनसे जानकारी कराइए ऑडियंस की।
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Agarwal sir. And thank you all the distinguished guests. और सब लोग आप लोग यहाँ पे आए, इसलिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। कैप्टन मनोज कुमार पांडे को मैं जब मिला वी वर इन क्लास 7। क्लास 7 में आप समझते हैं एज क्या होती है हमारी, 12-13 साल के आसपास होती है। उस समय से लेकर के 24 इयर्स में कारगिल वॉर फेस किया उसने। ये इम्पॉर्टेंट जो टीन एज ईयर्स हैं कि 13 साल से 24 साल के बीच का 87 to 99 वी वर टुगेदर, और 6 साल तो हम लोग सैनिक स्कूल में साथ रहे। रिगार्डिंग द पर्सनैलिटी ऑफ मनोज पांडे, आई टेल यू ही वॉज बेस्ट स्कॉलर ऑफ माई बैच। अब आप देखिए कि सैनिक स्कूल में जो बच्चे आते हैं वो पूरे यूपी से 70 लोग 50 लोग आते हैं, उनमें भी वो बेस्ट स्कॉलर था। ही वॉज बेस्ट स्पोर्ट्समैन ऑल्सो ऑफ माई बैच, बेस्ट स्पोर्ट्समैन भी था, बेस्ट स्कॉलर भी था, एंड ही वॉज ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द बेस्ट ऑलराउंडर। ही कुड प्ले फुटबॉल, क्रिकेट, बैडमिंटन, हॉकी, टेबल टेनिस, कैरम, वो प्लेइंग कार्ड्स, कुछ भी खिलवा लो, 2 दिन में सीख जाता था। दैट टाइप ऑफ वेरी रेयर टैलेंट आई हैव सीन इन माई लाइफ। आई कुड नॉट सी मोर टैलेंटेड दैन हिम, एंड व्हाट आई कुड गेट आउट ऑफ हिम जस्ट टू ट्राई टू कॉपी। मैं उसको कॉपी करके थोड़ा सा मैं भी इम्प्रूव कर गया, मुझे लगा। तो वेरी टैलेंटेड पर्सनालिटी। नेक्स्ट कमिंग टू कि क्या वो स्ट्रॉन्ग हेडेड था या डोसाइल सा था उसकी पर्सनालिटी, तो मैं बताऊं कि वो इट्स लाइक दैट कि इट इज़ बोथ। हम लोग जब 7th 8th में थे तो हमारी जो हॉस्टल होता था, जैसे सर लोग यहाँ पे, तो वहाँ पे एक टंडन हाउस हुआ करता था, उसमें अंदर ना लॉन्ग कॉरिडोर था फॉर दी वॉशरूम, अंदर जाके आपका टॉयलेटरीज एंड वो होते थे। हम लोग 8th क्लास में बच्चा क्या 12-13 साल उम्र होती है, तो उसमें एक मैडम हेल्डा की कहानी आती थी कि वो अभी नहीं है लाइफ, तो भूत बन चुकी हैं, वो आके पकड़ लेती हैं। हम सब लोग कभी कभी जाते थे ना, कोई अंदर जा रहा है, जोर से बोलते थे हेल्डा मैम आ गई, तो बच्चे दौड़ के वापस आते थे। दे कुड नॉट डेयर टू अटेंड दैट टॉयलेटरी से सकता, तो हम लोग डर के भाग जाते थे। एक बार हमने मनोज पांडे को डरा दिया, वो टॉयलेट करने नहीं गया, मैंने वापस आ गया, मैं नहीं जाऊँगा, हेल्डा मैम पकड़ लेंगे। तो डर एंड दैट फैक्टर वॉज देयर, तो वो चीज़ है। और ये घटना मैं बता रहा हूँ 89 की, और 99 में गेटिंग प्राइवेट चक्रा, तो दैट एस्पेक्ट वॉज देयर। फिर मैं कहता हूँ कि वो स्ट्रॉन्ग हेडेड एंड इसमें कि गरम दल का था या नरम दल का था। हम लोग 9th 10th में से हमारे हिस्ट्री के जो टीचर्स थे वो स्वतंत्रता संग्राम की कहानियाँ बताते थे। उन कहानियों में कि एक्सट्रीमिस्ट होते थे, उनका अपना एक अप्रोच था, लाइक भगत सिंह एंड अदर्स, चंद्रशेखर आजाद। फिर लिबरल्स भी थे, इनका कि नॉन वायलेंस वाली बात थी। तो हम लोग जो है ना बीइंग टीनेज में हम लोग एक्सट्रीमिस्ट को ज़्यादा फॉलो करते थे, भगत सिंह, सुभाष चंद्र बोस, लाइक दैट। बट ही फॉलोड गांधी जी। पता नहीं तुम लोग नहीं समझ पाते हो, तो हम लोग उसको काफ़ी वो करते थे, भाई तुम्हें आउट ऑफ दैट। सब लोग 10 लोग ये कहते थे कि नहीं हम एक्सट्रीमिस्ट को फॉलो कर रहे हैं, वो कहा नहीं मैं गांधी जी वॉज ग्रेट। तो हम कहते क्यों, तुमको ऐसा कैसे लगता है? कहा जब तुम थोड़े और बड़े हो गए तो पता चलेगा। तो यूज टू टेल अस कि तुम्हारे बच्चे, शायद वो मेरी उसकी जो थॉट प्रोसेस था हम सबसे शायद थोड़ा आगे था, और हम बाद में रियलाइज भी किए हाँ यार गांधी वॉज ग्रेट। तो वो ऐसी चीज़ें उसके अंदर थी। रिगार्डिंग धर्म की बात मैं कह दूँ थी, हम लोग साइंस स्कूल में जानते हैं सर, तो वहाँ पे एक मंदिर भी था आगे। तो ऑल 6 years ही वेंट टू दैट मंदिर, एंड एवरी ट्यूसडे मंगलवार को वो हनुमान मंदिर जाता था। मैं नहीं जाता था बट ही यूज्ड टू गो। तो रिलीजियस भी था, और ये सारी पर्सनैलिटी उसमें थी। ही वॉज ए कंप्लीट पर्सनैलिटी, ऑल इन वन। मैंने कि मैं कहा था कैरम भी खेलता था ना, तो वो राइट हैंड से बहुत अच्छा खेला, लेफ्ट हैंड से भी अच्छा खेल सकता था। ईटी वाला भी टेबल टेनिस भी खेलता था, तो राइट हैंड से को बच्चे खेलते हैं तो लेफ्ट से भी खेल लेता था, इक्वली गुड। मैंने दैट टैलेंट इज रियली वेरी रेयर टू सी एंड फाइंड। ही वाज दैट टाइप ऑफ पर्सनैलिटी।
बहुत बढ़िया। ये बताइए, आपने उनके वो भूत आ जाएगा नहीं गया। इन द आर्मी वी आर ऑल्सो ह्यूमन बींग्स, and let me tell you, after being into all hot spots, and as I told you, into the thick of things, we feel fear. We are taught to overcome fear. ये हमारे प्रशिक्षण का एक अभिन्न अंग है कि अपने मन के डर के ऊपर विजय प्राप्त करना, प्रशिक्षण से, ट्रेनिंग से, अपने साथियों संबंधियों के सामने अपनी लाज रखना और उनकी जान सलामती की चिंता रखना, और अपनी पलटन के नाम से। These are the standard techniques or tools used to motivate a soldier like me to go in the face of certain death. मनोज के चक्कर में इस विषय में आप क्या कहेंगे?
सर, मनोज को ये जो आपने कहा कि डेथ और ये मैं बताऊं, हमारे ना बड़े स्ट्रॉन्ग डिस्कशन होते थे कि जब वो एनडीए चला गया, आई कुड नॉट ज्वाइन आर्मी, दो आई क्वालिफाइड बट आई एम मेंटली ड्रॉप आउट। मनोज पांडे गॉट AIR 50, उसकी 50वीं रैंक थी एनडीए में। तो जब वो एनडीए गया तो मैं देखा नाउ इज गेटिंग मोर इनटू पैट्रियोटिक फीलिंग, क्योंकि वो टैलेंटेड था, दिमाग था, वो IIT के लिए भी करता तो चला ही गया होता, इंजीनियरिंग कॉलेज ही कुड हैव जॉइन, लेकिन उसने एनडीए को ही ध्यान में रखा। और जैसे से ट्रेनिंग होती जा रही थी ना, तो उसकी दुनियादारी थोड़ी कम होती गई। आई हैव सीन कि उसका अंदर पैट्रियोटिज्म ज़्यादा आ रहा है, देश के लिए कुछ करना है, देश के लिए कुछ करना है, ऐसा हमेशा आता था। आई केप्ट ऑन जस्ट सेइंग टू हिम, वार्निंग हिम लाइक दैट कि बेटा ऐसा मत करो, थोड़ा बहुत ईमानदार हो, दैट इज एनफ टू सर्व द नेशन। हम ईमानदार हैं, हम खुद गलत नहीं कर रहे हैं, जान देने वाली बात नहीं होनी चाहिए। ऐसे डिस्कशन हमारे उसके कभी कभी ना पूरी रात चलते थे कि क्या इज इट वर्थ इट, इंडिया इज वर्थ इट कि हम इसके लिए जान दें। वो सब जानता था कि इंडिया में करप्शन है, पॉलिटिक्स है, ये चीज़ें हैं, सब कुछ है, सब कुछ गलत है, लेकिन हमेशा उसी को डिफेंड करता था कि नहीं, बात आएगी तो मैं जान दे दूंगा। मैं क्या, क्यों? कहा जानते हो मैं नहीं रहूँगा ना तो मेरे पेरेंट्स का ख्याल मेरी आर्मी मुझसे ज़्यादा करेगी। तो दैट थिंग ही है। एंड ही वाज अ ग्रेट प्लानर, ही वाज अ ग्रेट प्लानर। प्लानर इन द सेंस देखिए कि वो IMA में जो लोग जाते हैं, IMA में यू हैव टू फिल द 3 चॉइसेस फॉर द आर्मी कि आप क्या चॉइसेस भरना चाहते हैं। देयर ऑल द 3 चॉइसेस ही पुट इट इन्फेंट्री, फर्स्ट चॉइस 1, चॉइस 2, चॉइस 3, ऑल द 3 इन्फेंट्री। उसने इन्फेंट्री के अलावा कोई चॉइस रखा ही नहीं, डिस्पाइट ऑफ द फैक्ट ही वाज इन द रैंक 22। अगर किसी के IMA पास आउट पे अगर रैंक 22 आ रही है तो ही कुड गेट अदर सॉफ्ट एरियाज आल्सो, सिग्नल्स है, इंजीनियरिंग है, समथिंग लाइक दैट आल्सो, बट ही केप्ट दैट थिंग, ही वाज वेरी क्लियर। दूसरी चीज बताया कि जो प्लानर की बात है कि वंस वी आर अपियरिंग फॉर SSB के लिए, जब हम 12th के बाद NDA रिटर्न क्वालिफाई करते हैं, SSB के लिए जाते हैं, SSB में भी केप्ट ऑन डिस्कसिंग द थिंग्स कि भाई तुमने इस क्वेश्चन में क्या लिखा, इस क्वेश्चन में क्या लिखा, तो यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन योरसेल्फ। देयर इन दैट वन थिंग इज देयर कि यू हैव टू मेंशन व्हाट्स एम ऑफ अ लाइफ। हम लोग डिस्कस किए, जैसे मैंने लिखा था कि टू बी अ आर्मी ऑफिसर, कोई लिखा था टू बी क्लास 1 ऑफिसर, टू बी गुड ह्यूमन बीइंग। इट इज द स्टोरी ऑफ 1993, रियल फैक्ट। उसने लिखा था आई वांट टू गेट परमवीर चक्र। कब लिख दिया? इन द मंथ January 1993 he written in that self declaration I want to get परमवीर चक्र। कारगिल वॉर इज हैपनिंग इन 1999। तो पता नहीं उसकी प्लानिंग थी या क्या अप्रोच था कि he joined the army and he got that thing। तो अगर उसकी सारी चीज़ों को हम देखें कि ह्यूमन बिहेवियर या ह्यूमन टच जो आता है, तो ये दुनियादारी जो होती है, सब कुछ उसको पता था। इवन ही टुक दिस गोरखा राइफल्स एज हिज रेजिमेंट, गोरखा को प्रीफर किया बेस्ट टू इन्फेंट्री में ही। ये कॉज के पीछे फॉलोअप उसका था कि लखनऊ जो है गोरखा राइफल्स का रेजिमेंटल सेंटर है। कहा अगर मैं ना नहीं रहा तो मेरे पेरेंट्स के लिए ना मेरी रेजिमेंट विल टेक केयर, उनके डे टू डे एक्टिविटीज में खाना पीना या उनके जो फौजी पेंशन या जो भी होती है, पता नहीं क्या उसके प्लान में था। समटाइम आई फील है कि उसका जो सिक्स सेंस होता है, सबकॉन्शियस माइंड वाज फार अहेड ऑफ अस इन द थॉट प्रोसेस एंड लाइक दैट। ही वाज वेरी इंटेलिजेंट। मैथ्स के क्वेश्चंस वो ऐसे कर लेता था कि हम लोग कोई आधे घंटे कोई क्वेश्चन करते थे, वो 2 मिनट में कर लेता था। तो हिज फेवरेट सब्जेक्ट वाज मैथ्स। तो इन सब चीज़ों के साथ भी, सारी चीज़ों को जानते हुए भी, ही टुक द चांस and serve the nation in the best possible way। Yes,
इसी में मैं बता दूं, भारतीय सेना में एक प्रथा है, जब हम कोई भी रेजिमेंट ज्वाइन करते हैं तो हम उस रेजिमेंट के ट्रूप्स की भाषा सीखते हैं। तो जो गुरखा रेजिमेंट ज्वाइन करेगा वो गुरखाली सीखेगा, चाहे वो केरला का हो, कहीं का हो। तो आज भी मुझे कुमाऊनी गीत याद है, क्योंकि मैं कुमाऊं रेजिमेंट का हूँ। The point is, what were last words जब उसको पैर में लगा, हाथ में लगा, और वो बढ़ता रहा, अपने जवानों को आगे लाता रहा। He died finally, he got a burst on his head। इतने लगने के बाद अगर वो बैठ जाता और बाकी लोग आगे जाते तो बहुत अच्छा होता और बिल्कुल सही भी होता, लेकिन वो आगे गया। आगे गया, माथे में खाई गोली, बस्ट। मरते वक्त उसके लास्ट शब्द क्या थे? न छोड़ो, विच इन गोरखाली मीन्स लीव नो एनिमी। मैं दो चीजें बता रहा हूं इससे आपको। एक, गोरखाली जो कि उसकी मातृभाषा नहीं है, मरते दम पे वो भर के आई। जवानों से संबंध कितना घनिष्ठ और गहरा है। दूसरी, फोकस्ड ऑन गोल अकम्प्लिशमेंट। मेरा लक्ष्य ये है, हमारे साहित्य में कहानी है ना, तुम्हें क्या दिखता है? चिड़िया की आंख, है ना, सबने पढ़ी होगी, ना छोड़ो। एंड दीज काइंड्स ऑफ थिंग्स आई हैव सीन, दे मोटिवेट पीपल अ लॉट। कम्युनिस्ट बड़े सुपरस्टिशियस होते हैं, तो आई हैड सेड हमने पाकिस्तान के कमांडोज की फोर्स कैप्चर करी है, पोस्ट अटैक आएगा और मैं तो यहीं मरूंगा। और जो अगर कोई पीछे भागा, कम्युनिस्ट आर वेरी सुपरस्टिशियस, मेरा भूत जिंदगी भर तुम्हें जीने नहीं देगा। That was my way of ensuring, because I was 1+8, 9 people at 20,000 feet high in Siachen. Anyway, back to ना छोड़ो। Now, किताब में आपने 3 चैप्टर दिए हैं, उसमें आपने उनके पर्सनल डायरी के ग्लिम्पसेस दिए हैं। उनकी माताजी ने जब इनके अनुरोध पे कुछ लिखा, उसकी बहन ने कुछ लिखा। तो सवाल ये उठता है कि उसकी फैमिली में, वैसे तो पूछना बहुत शायद सही नहीं होगा, वो किसको ज़्यादा चाहता था या उसको कौन ज़्यादा चाहता था? क्या इस विषय पे कुछ प्रकाश डालना चाहेंगे?
Yes sir, in the family he was very close to his mother, और इन दोनों की पर्सनालिटी भी मैंने देखा कि काफ़ी एक सिमिलर सी थी। और इवन जब ये कारगिल वॉर होता है, इसको जो गोली लगती है, तो मदर को एहसास हो चुका था कि शायद माई सन इज़ नॉट इन गुड पोजिशन, और उसको शायद कुछ हादसा ऐसे हुआ है। तो एक 6th सेंस तो उनके पास था। और जैसे कि मनोज पांडे बहुत ही हम्बल बैकग्राउंड से रहे, और उनके पिताजी की पहले नॉर्मल पान की शॉप थी, वहाँ से उन्होंने स्टार्ट किया। बट ही वॉज वेरी ब्राइट स्टूडेंट। तो देखिए क्लास 6 में ही गॉट दी स्कॉलरशिप। तो स्कॉलरशिप के पैसे से उसने पढ़ा, और घर की जो सारी कंडीशंस होती हैं कि अपने पिताजी को, फादर को सपोर्ट करना। यू नो कि इन क्लास 8 उसको जो यूपी गवर्नमेंट की स्कॉलरशिप आती थी, अपने फादर के लिए उसने क्लास 8 में बाइसिकल खरीद के उनको गिफ्ट दी थी। तो वो तभी से ही उसके अंदर ये था कि हमको सपोर्ट करना है फैमिली को, या अपना एक जो रोल होता है। अपने फादर के लिए भी उसका ये था कि हाँ मेरे फादर बहुत हार्ड वर्किंग, उनको सपोर्ट करना है। तो इस तरह से उसने फादर को भी, फैमिली को भी सपोर्ट किया। बट जहाँ पे होता है ना कि दिल मिलने वाली बात है, या जहाँ पे की है किससे ज़्यादा ट्यून्ड था, तो वो मदर से ही था। और मदर उनकी, हम लोग अक्सर मिलते थे, बातचीत होती थी। आफ्टर द कारगिल वॉर ऑल्सो आई ऑलवेज फ्रीक्वेंटली विजिट टू हिज हाउस। मदर की अभी लास्ट अप्रैल 2021 में ये डेथ हुई ड्यू टू कैंसर। तो उनको ये जो प्रॉब्लम आई उस भी की बहुत ज़्यादा सोचती थी उसके बारे में, हमेशा उनके लिए बातचीत करते रहती थी। तो एक उनका जो अटैचमेंट था वो मदर से ही था मुझ पर।
जी देखिए, ये चरित्र, ये व्यक्ति और उस व्यक्ति का बेस्ट फ्रेंड जिसने ये किताब लिखी है, ये एक मौका है आप लोगों को सवाल पूछने का। और इसी के लिए मैं अपनी चीज़ संक्षिप्त में रखते हुए लेखक की वाणी आपके सवालों के उससे उजागर करना चाहूँगा, तो भरपूर सवाल पूछेगा। मेरा लास्ट सवाल, कैप्टन मनोज पांडे परमवीर चक्र के जीवन से हमारे नवयुवकों, नवयुवतियों को क्या प्रेरणा लेनी चाहिए? What lessons should they draw for their lives from कैप्टन मनोज पांडे परमवीर चक्र?
सर उसकी बायोग्राफी को जैसे हमने पढ़ा, जैसे कि मैं तुझको देख के फॉलो किया तो मुझे लगा आई अचीव सो मेनी थिंग्स इन माय लाइफ आई कुड नॉट हैव गॉट। और कोई भी उसके बारे में पढ़ रहे हैं तो मैं पहले बताया था कि ही वाज वेरी टैलेंटेड। आपको हर एक रीडर को ना अलग अलग एक्सपेक्ट मिलेंगे। किसी एक से बोला तो मैं कह रहा कि मैंने तो टाइम मैनेजमेंट सीखा, कोई अच्छी प्लानिंग सीखता है, कोई टाइम मैनेजमेंट सीखता है। उसका लेटर्स आप देखेंगे लगेगा कितनी अच्छी हैंड राइटिंग है, कोई ये भी सीख सकता है। कि टफेस्ट ऑफ द कंडीशन में, आप उसकी जो लास्ट लेटर की बात करें तो टफेस्ट ऑफ द कंडीशन, पहाड़ से वहाँ पे कोई टेबल नहीं लगी है आपको लेटर लिखने के लिए, वन ऑफ द फाइनेस्ट राइटिंग्स में चीज़ें लिखता है। तो उसकी पर्सनालिटी में सब कुछ था, मतलब कि अब आपका होता है कि हम उसमें से क्या ले पाते हैं। तो आप देखो कि नथिंग इज इम्पॉसिबल भी उसके लिए है, कुछ भी उसके लिए इम्पॉसिबल नहीं था। He would have done anything। जैसे हम लोग कभी सोचते थे कि ये तुमने कैसे कर लिया। मैं उसका एक एग्जांपल बताता हूँ आपको कि वो नथिंग इज इम्पॉसिबल वाली बात पे कि इन 10th एंड 11th वी वर हैविंग दिस वॉलीबॉल मैच। तो हम लोग एक साइड में वॉलीबॉल में एक साइड में 6 लोग होते हैं, दोनों टीम में 6 लोग होते हैं। तो हमारी साइड में उस दिन प्लेयर्स कम थे, तो हम लोग 5 लोग थे और मनोज की साइड में 3 लोग थे। तो 5 वर्सेस 3, क्योंकि वो अच्छा खेलता था तो उसको 3 से ही खेलना था और 5 वर्सेस 3 में गेम चल रहा था। हम लोग 5 थे तो हम लोग उसको हरा दे रहे थे, क्योंकि बॉल उसको नहीं देते थे, बाकी 2 को देते थे जहाँ पे उसको ड्रॉप करा सके। अब मनोज पांडे थोड़ा फ्रस्ट्रेट होना शुरू हुआ कि यार ये क्या है, ये लोग तो मुझे स्केप मार रहे हैं। उसने कहा ना दोनों हट जाओ, बाकी 2 को भी हटा दिया, कहा नाउ आई विल प्ले विद ऑल ऑफ यू। तो जब उसने ये किया था तो हम लोग खुद ही बैटिंग छोड़ दिए, भैया तुम नहा दो। तो ही वॉज लाइक दैट कि उसका जो चैलेंज लेने का लेवल ही अलग होता था और माइंडसेट इट वाज वेरी स्ट्रांग। तो बहुत ही स्ट्रांग माइंडसेट है। और जैसे आपको बताऊं कि आपने ये वैष्णो देवी जो हम लोग जाते हैं, वैष्णो देवी अगर किसी ने वॉक करके गए हो नीचे से कटरा से ऊपर तक और वापस आए हो तो जानते हैं वो वैष्णो देवी जाना और आना पूरा ही कंप्लीटेड इन क्लोज टू 5 to 6 आवर्स, गया भी आ भी गया। तो उसकी जो फिजिकल फिटनेस थी वो भी अलग लेवल की थी। वो जब सियाचिन गया, सियाचिन में उसकी पोस्टिंग रही। सियाचिन में टफेस्ट ऑफ द पोस्ट है, पहलवान पोस्ट है। तो पहलवान पोस्ट उसने मांगी थी अपने लिए। पहलवान पोस्ट जैसे सियाचिन में लोग जाते हैं, सब जैसे जानते होंगे कि वहाँ पे लोग 4 घंटे एक्स्ट्रा नहीं रहना चाहते हैं, 1 दिन एक्स्ट्रा नहीं रहना चाहते हैं। ही स्टेड देयर 1 month एक्स्ट्रा, खुद ऑफर किया, वहाँ पे जाके रुका। तो मतलब उसके डेयर डेविल भी था, टफनेस भी थी। इवन कारगिल में जब वो सियाचिन में गया है तो वहाँ पे उसने इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स बनाए जिससे कि लॉजिस्टिक मतलब सामान को जल्दी से ऊपर ले जाना, पुली वगैरह बना करके ऐसा बना दिया था कि उसने सियाचिन में इतना अच्छा काम किया था कि हिज नेम वाज रिकमेंडेड फॉर दिस शौर्य चक्र एंड ऑल ऑलरेडी बिफोर द कारगिल आल्सो। मैंने कि वो इतना अच्छा किया था क्योंकि उसकी उनकी ट्रूप जो है अप्रैल में वापस आई थी सियाचिन टू श्रीनगर। नाउ दे वर गोइंग टुवर्ड्स पुणे उनका पीस पोस्टिंग आ चुका था। बट इन दैट इन बिटवीन टाइम उसने सियाचिन में पोस्टिंग ली और ये सब भी काम किए थे। तो अगर उसके लाइफ की कोई भी प्रोफाइल आप देखेंगे तो किसी को लगेगा कि बहुत रिलीजियस भी था, बहुत टैलेंटेड भी है, स्कॉलर भी है, मैथमेटिक्स है, ऑलराउंडर है, एवरीथिंग इज देयर, इमोशंस है, एवरीथिंग इज देयर। तो अगर आप उस बुक को पढ़ें उसकी पर्सनालिटी को कैसे भी जाने तो यू विल हैव सो मेनी।
यानी बहुमुखी चरित्र और व्यक्तित्व, जिसको जिस अंश से प्रेरणा लेनी है ले सकता है। अब समय है आप लोगों के प्रश्नों का।
यस प्लीज।
मेरा क्वेश्चन सर आपसे ये है,
एक माइक दें इनको प्लीज। कृपया अपना नाम बता दें।
सर मेरा नाम हर्षवर्धन शाह है। सर मेरा क्वेश्चन आपसे ये है कि आपने जैसे अपने बेस्ट फ्रेंड के ऊपर बुक लिखी, तो आपने उनकी लाइफ से उनके जाने के बाद कभी ऐसा हो कि उनकी लाइफ से कुछ ऐसे पॉइंट्स या कुछ ऐसी चीजें जो आपकी लाइफ में बहुत बार हुई और आपको लगा कि मेरा फ्रेंड होना चाहिए था मेरे पास?
इनफैक्ट आप जो कह रहे हो कि वो फ्रेंड हमारे पास होना चाहिए था, तो ये बहुत राइट है कि आई मिस्ड हिम अ लॉट इन द सेंस कि क्योंकि आप हॉस्टल लाइफ में सैनिक स्कूल में हॉस्टल लाइफ में साथ रहते हो 24 घंटे, इसके साथ आप 24 घंटे 5-6 साल लगातार रहे हो। टीनेज टाइम में 13 ईयर्स 18 ईयर्स तक अचानक वो थोड़ा दूर चला जाए, फिर अपनी ट्रेनिंग में उसके बाद नहीं भी रहे लाइफ में, तो मिसिंग पार्ट बहुत है। और उसी मिसिंग की वजह से मैंने ये बुक लिखी, क्योंकि हर बार उसको मिस करना, तो मिस करने को ध्यान में रखते हुए ये बुक लिखी। और जब मिस हुआ तो तभी उसको लिखा। और 10 साल क्यों लगे? क्योंकि आई वॉज ऑल्सो स्टार्टिंग माई कैरियर। जैसे आप देखिए 24 साल में उसकी कारगिल वार हो चुका था, 24 साल में हम लोग स्ट्रगल ही कर रहे थे सिविल लाइफ में टू हैव अ गुड कैरियर लाइक दैट। तो मैं उसमें एमएससी कर रहा था, उसके बाद हमने नेट जेआरएफ किया, फिर धीरे धीरे 2002 तक जाके मैं सेटल हुआ। इनिशियल जो आपकी जॉब होती है उसमें भी आपको फाइट करना होता है, तो उससे समय कुछ मिलता था तो मैं लिखता था। और मम्मी ने जैसे एक मोटिवेशन दिया था कि आप इनके ऊपर बायोग्राफी लिखो, तो मैं एक्चुअली में आंटी जी को ऐसे बताया, क्योंकि कुछ कुछ छोटे छोटे लीफलेट्स कुछ लोग लिख के देते थे, 10 पेज का 5 पेज का मनोज पांडे की लाइफ के बारे में। तो उसमें कुछ लोग मुझसे पूछते, तो मुझे लगा कि मैं तो इनसे अच्छा भी लिख सकता हूँ, बिकॉज आई हैव सो मच एम्पल ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन। आई स्टार्टेड कलेक्टिंग दोज थिंग्स, और जब जब लगा जैसे जैसे मिला टिट्स एंड बिट्स में, आई केप्ट ऑन राइटिंग। और उसमें भी एक मोटिवेशन आता था कि जनरली मैंने बुक कब लिखी, 11 बजे से 1 बजे के बीच में, रात को 11 बजे से 1 बजे के बीच में, जब सब लोग सो जाते थे, मुझे नींद नहीं आई। जब नींद नहीं आती तो किताब ये लिखता था, उससे बड़ा अच्छा लगता था, मोटिवेट फील होता था, हाँ यार। और जब लिखता था तो बहुत मोटिवेशन आता था, कि लगता था कि आई एम टॉकिंग टू हिम, और कुछ न कुछ उससे मोटिवेशन आए। तो मिसिंग पार्ट तो रहा, और मिसिंग के साथ ही जब मैंने बुक लिख दी, टू बी वेरी फ्रैंक, जब बुक लिख दी तो मिसिंग वाला पार्ट थोड़ा हट गया, लगा कि हाँ यार एक सही चीज़ उसको होता ना, कि मुझे भी शांति मिल गई, उसको भी शांति मिल गई, और चीज़ें हुई।
देखिए, पवन जी की ये किताब 2015 में छपी और अंग्रेजी और हिंदी दोनों में उपलब्ध है। इसके कुछ कॉपीज यहाँ पर भी ऑथर्स लाउंज के पास हैं। आगे सवाल जी, आप बताएं।
सर एक,
अच्छा आप पूछ लीजिए, उसके बाद आपको माइक दीजिएगा, उसके बाद आपको। ओके।
मेरा नाम राजेश कुमार दुबे है। मैंने भारतीय वायुसेना में पैराट्रूपर 40 साल रहा हूँ। आई वॉज इन एयरफोर्स फॉर 40 ईयर्स। अभी मैं गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में बच्चों को फ्री पढ़ाता हूँ, सब 12वीं क्लास के। तो हम ये सोचते हैं कि सेवा का मतलब ये नहीं कि हम कोई बहुत बड़ा, जो अपने लेवल में जो कुछ कर सकते करना चाहिए। मेरा सर क्वेश्चन ये है कि ये जो मनोज पांडे जी के कैरेक्टर है, हम इसको 12th की क्लास में मध्य प्रदेश बोर्ड से हमारी यदि संस्था रिकमेंड करे, सर से मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा, तो 12th के सिलेबस में और एनसीसी में कंपलसरी दिस लेसन शुड बी देयर, सो दैट दे विल लर्न। बच्चे जो मोटिवेट हों, इससे बड़ा कोई मोटिवेशनल लेवल मुझे कुछ लगता नहीं कुछ है। उनके जीवन का हर एक पहलू बहुत रोचक है और बहुत ही बच्चों को प्रेरणादायक है। तो यदि प्रयास किया जाए तो ये बहुत एक अच्छी स्थिति होगी। यदि आप भी थोड़ा प्रयास करें तो बस इतना मेरा अनुरोध है। धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू सर। इसमें मैं बताऊंगा आपको कि पीवीसीज पे उनकी लाइफ पे एक चैप्टर जो है एनसीईआरटी बुक में इनकॉर्पोरेट किया गया है, एंड इट इज इन द प्रोसेस। गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया का अपना एक है, इस सरकार का है कि पीवीसीज की लाइफ को एनसीईआरटी बुक में डाला जाएगा। किस स्टैंडर्ड में कहाँ पे है वो तो मुझे नहीं पता, बट इट हैज बीन डन और वो अंदर प्रोसेस आ चुका है।
जी आप बताएं।
हेलो सर, हेलो एवरीवन। सो माय क्वेश्चन इज,
नहीं, अपना नाम और परिचय दे दें प्लीज।
माय नेम इज अमन एंड आई एम फ्रॉम रीवा। आई एम डूइंग
अमन फ्रॉम रीवा, यस।
So my question is to you, sir. Are people like Captain Manoj Pandey born or are they made?
देखिए, दे आर अ कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ बोथ। हमारा इतिहास, हमारे कल्चर बोलता है संस्कार और प्रारब्ध, तो वो तो हो गया बॉर्न का हिस्सा। और ये विवाद लीडर्स आर बॉर्न और मेड से उठाऊं तो मेड, बहुत सारा जो हम आगे बनते हैं, हमारे जीवन में क्या इन्फ्लुएंसेस हुए, कैसे टीचर मिले, कैसी संगत मिली। सत्संग में आप जाते हैं, आपके माता पिता दादी नानी जाती हैं, सत्संग का मतलब क्या है? सत्संग, अच्छी संगत। तो उस संगत का बहुत फर्क पड़ता है। सो यस, दे आर बोर्न बेसिस योर संस्कार एंड प्रारब्ध, दैट इज योर पास्ट, एंड दे आर मेड बेसिस द influences in your life and how you choose to absorb that influence. आपके संग जो एक अनुभव हुआ, उसको अनुभव को आपने किस दृष्टिकोण से अपने अंतरात्मा में बैठाया पे निर्भर है कि आप पे आगे क्या प्रभाव वो अनुभव डालेगा। Have I answered your question?
सर हाँ, मैं उसमें ऐड करूंगा, जैसे सर ने तो बिल्कुल सही बात कही, इट इज द कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ बोथ। मैं उसके लाइफ से इंसिडेंट बताता हूँ जहाँ पर आपको प्रूव होगा कि इस कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ बोथ। वैसे बताओ कि 7th में हम लोग आए तो क्रॉस कंट्री एक रेस होती है सैनिक स्कूल्स में, यू हैव टू रन फॉर 4 किलोमीटर्स 8 किलोमीटर्स इन द मॉर्निंग, उसका एक कंपटीशन भी होता है। इन द क्लास 7th अगर मान लीजिए 200 बच्चे थे जो क्रॉस कंट्री रेस में गए थे, तो मनोज पांडे की रैंक जो आई थी वो 120 के आसपास थी, मतलब नॉट गुड। तो 8th में उसको लगा नहीं यार ये तो गड़बड़ हो रहा है मेरे साथ, मेरा तो कोई रैंक ही नहीं, मुझे तो टोकन भी नहीं मिला, तो आई वाज डिस्क्वालीफाइड। इन क्लास 8th में he stood second, क्लास 9 he stood first। तो आप क्या कहेंगे कुछ बॉर्न था, कुछ इवॉल्व हुआ, इवोल्यूशन हैपेंड, तो इवोल्यूशन हुआ उसके साथ। एक और एग्जांपल लेता हूँ, एकेडमिकली हम लोग 9th क्लास में, मुझे याद है संस्कृत एग्जाम में उसके फेल हो गए थे, सबसे कम नंबर आ गए थे। कहा यार ऐसे कैसे होगा, अगली एग्जाम में मैं फर्स्ट आऊँगा, सबसे हाईएस्ट मार्क्स मेरे ही आएंगे। नेक्स्ट एग्जाम में उसके संस्कृत में भी हाईएस्ट आए। तो मतलब कि ही टुक द चैलेंज लाइक दैट वे। ऐसे ही बताओ कि हम लोग के यहाँ एथलेटिक्स होता था, एथलेटिक्स जो इवेंट होता था ईयरली, इन दैट एथलेटिक्स इवेंट वो ही वाज ए गुड रनर फॉर 800 and 1500 मीटर्स। बियॉन्ड दैट क्या होता था कि एक पूल वॉल्ट भी उसमें आता था इवेंट। तो पूल वॉल्ट में आप लोग देखते होंगे कैसे लोग करते हैं, सर्वे बुक का एंड ऑल। तो हम लोग का तो नॉर्मल पास के उसे ही किया जाता था, जो स्टिक होती थी। तो हम दोनों पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे थे। तो हम लोग ना एनी हाउ कुछ कूद देते, चलो यार थोड़ा बहुत पार कर लेंगे तो हमारे हाउस को ना 2 मार्क्स मिल जाएंगे। देयर वाज नो एम एज सच कि हमको फर्स्ट आना है या टॉप करना है, क्योंकि हमको कुछ पता नहीं था, ट्रेनिंग नहीं थी। हम दोनों उसको कर देते। आई वॉज वेरी क्लोज फॉलोअर ऑफ हिम। मैं बताऊँ, अगर वो क्लास में फर्स्ट आता था ना तो मैं भी सेकंड थर्ड जरूर आता था। हाँ, अगर वो क्रॉस कंट्री में भी मैंने क्लोजली चेज किया, ही वाज कमिंग फर्स्ट, आई यूज्ड टू कम सेकंड थर्ड। मैं बड़ा इंप्रूव कर गया उसके साथ रह के। और मैं जाते समय वहाँ पे कॉन्फिडेंस मेरा बहुत कम था। मैं एक साइंस स्कूल जब मैं गया था तो आई वाज इन द वेरी लो कॉन्फिडेंस, कि मैं तो अगर 50 बच्चे, तो मैं हिंदी मीडियम से आया था, मुझे लगा कि मेरी तो 50वीं रैंक ही आएगी। आई वॉज वेरी श्योर। यस सर। हुआ क्या, उस दिन क्या हुआ, मेरे वहाँ फिर एक और बच्चा आ गया, 2 बच्चे और आ गए। मैं कहा लो अब तो 52वीं रैंक आएगी। तो हम डर जाते थे। लेकिन बताऊँ आपको, हार्ड वर्क का क्या सब्स्टिट्यूट होता है कि हम 7th क्लास में जब थे तो मैं अंधाधुंध खूब पढ़ा, मैंने कि बिना सोच के खूब पढ़ा। एक टेस्ट हुआ, मंथली टेस्ट, आई स्टूड फर्स्ट इन माई क्लास। लगा कि जानते क्या लगा, मामला ठीक है, इतना बुरा नहीं है। तो वो कॉन्फिडेंस आता है, वो इवोल्यूशन, और इसके साथ रह के मैंने कि मैं अच्छा परफॉर्म तभी कर पाया कि इसको फॉलो करके। मैं क्रॉस कंट्री एक बार मैं अच्छा दौड़ता था, अच्छा नहीं कर पाता, तो इसने बताया ऐसे ऐसे करो। हम लोग ट्रिक्स लगाते हैं, छोटे छोटे ट्रिक्स बताता, ऐसे करो ऐसे करो। अगर आप उसके साथ रहते हैं तो यू आर बॉर्न टू विन, आपको विनर बना ही देगा उसकी संगत, वो मैंने पाया।
Next question, please. My name is Adish Awasthi. I am from Chhatarpur district, sir. I am here in Bhopal for higher studies. My question is that like एक IAS ऑफिसर होता है वो ex IAS ऑफिसर हो जाता है, एक IPS होता है वो ex IPS हो जाता है, बट जो आर्मी मैन रहता है, आप कैप ब्रिगेडियर हैं, आप हमेशा ब्रिगेडियर रहेंगे। तो मतलब सर ये एटीट्यूड या पर्सनैलिटी का कोई फर्क होता है कि सिर्फ नाम हमेशा साथ रहता है? क्योंकि बाकी सब और पोस्ट है, प्राइम मिनिस्टर, एक्स प्रेसिडेंट, but once a captain always a captain, once a major always a captain. So sir, I want to know that. मतलब
देखिए, ये मात्र भारत में ही नहीं पर दुनिया की ये प्रथा है कि फौजी का जो टाइटल होता है, डॉक्टर और फौजी का टाइटल, चाहे वो हवलदार हो, चाहे वो मेजर साहब हो, कर्नल साहब हो, जनरल साहब हो, ना ही कि सेवा निवृत्ति के बाद उसके साथ रहता है, मरणोपरांत भी उसके साथ रहता है। और ये बाय एन एक्ट ऑफ पार्लियामेंट है इंडिया में, ये किसी की मनमर्जी से नोचा हुआ नहीं है। और ये तो आप लोगों का प्रेम है, और जो ये इसके पीछे की भावनाएं है ना, वो ही उस आदमी को मोटिवेट करती हैं। और वो एटीट्यूड, और वो एक तरीके से, मैं 64 साल का हूं लेकिन मैं अपने आप को 64 इयर्स यंग समझता हूं। शारीरिक तकलीफें तो हैं लेकिन दिखेंगी नहीं आपको। अरे हैं तकलीफें, गाड़ी की डेंटिंग पेंटिंग तो होनी है, लाख किलोमीटर चल चुकी है, इंजन ठीक चलना चाहिए, इंजन ठीक चल रहा है। I hope indirectly I have answered your question. Yes, please. Next question. Yeah.
One last question. It's the man in the yellow.
Okay. No, we'll have one more, please. There's somebody who's raised his hand. After the blue, that gentleman there. Any others? Oh, there are 2, 3. Can we have 2 more out of these 3?
We are running quite late.
Okay. We can meet the author after this session in the foyer. बाहर आप लोग मिल सकते हैं। अभी समय की पाबंदी की वजह से मात्र हम 2 प्रश्न ले पाएंगे। प्लीज।
सर, मेरा नाम हर्ष मिश्रा है। तो मेरा क्वेश्चन पवन सर से कि मनु सर की आइडियोलॉजी आपकी लाइफ में कैसा इम्पैक्ट कर रही है?
एक्चुअली में मैं मनोज की आइडियोलॉजी पे ही चल रहा हूँ। मैं बताऊँ, मैं बताऊँ, बहुत सच्ची घटना है। क्लास 9th में हम लोग थे, हमारी संस्कृत की मैम थी, बहुत बोरिंग संस्कृत पढ़ाती थी, आई पढ़ा के चली गई, बोरिंग सा चैप्टर था। तो मैं उसी दिन जानते क्या, क्लास में बैठा तो मैं कहा यार सब कुछ करूँगा, टीचर नहीं बनूंगा। मनोज पांडे ने तुरंत बोला, तड़ाक से बोला, तुरंत बोला, 1989 की बात है, कहा नहीं तुम टीचर बनोगे, बहुत अच्छा टीचर बनोगे, क्योंकि तुम्हारे अंदर हार्डवर्क और डिसिप्लिन, सिंसियरिटी वाला पार्ट अच्छा है। और 99 में मैं टीचर से अपना करियर शुरू किया और आज भी टीचर हूँ। तो उसकी आइडियोलॉजी पे ही चल रहा हूँ। मैंने कि आई हैव रिटन ए बुक, आई रन ए स्कूल इन हिज नेम। तो मैंने कि मेरा लाइफ 80% क्या मैं उसी को जी रहा हूँ, ऐसा समझिए, थोड़ा बहुत इंस्पिरेशन मिला।
मैं आपको यहाँ बता दूं कि पवन जी विद्या मंदिर के लखनऊ के हेड हैं। लास्ट क्वेश्चन प्लीज।
Good evening, sir. My name is Animesh Aditya and I am an officer trainee in SSB Academy. सर जैसे आपने बताया कैप्टन मनोज पांडे मतलब उन्होंने काफ़ी इंस्पायर किया मुझे, और उनके बारे में मतलब मैं काफ़ी टाइम से पढ़ रहा हूँ। जैसे आपसे मिलने से पहले मतलब रचना बिष्ट मैम, उन्होंने वो भी कारगिल कॉन्वर्सेशंस चलाती, तो उसका भी मैं हिस्सा रहा हूँ, और उनके काफ़ी जितने भी वॉर हीरोज हैं उनके पेरेंट्स से काफ़ी बातचीत करी है। तो सर जैसे अभी हम लोग भी ऑफिस अभी एकेडमी में ट्रेनिंग जा रहे हैं, तो आप कुछ उनके एनडीए के डेज के थ्रू कुछ आप इंसिडेंट शेयर कर सकें, क्योंकि जैसे अभी आपने एक क्रॉस कंट्री की बात भी करी थी, जैसे उन्होंने वो क्लास 7 में 120th उनकी पोजीशन आई थी। जहाँ तक मुझे याद है जो कारगिल कॉन्वर्सेशंस में कि उन्होंने एनडीए में भी जाके जो रिकॉर्ड स्थापित किया था जो क्रॉस कंट्री का था। तो सर आप कुछ एनडीए डेज के कुछ एक्सेप्ट शेयर कर सके थे?
और श्योर इवन जैसे एनडीए में भी गया है, तो मैं तो उसके साथ एनडीए नहीं जा पाया था, बट थ्रू लेटर्स वी यूज्ड टू एक्सचेंज दोज थिंग्स। तो एक तो बात है कि सर वहाँ पर सिंगल फोर्ट कहाँ पे जाते थे लोग, तो सिंगल फोर्ट वहाँ से कुछ 20 किलोमीटर दूर था, वहाँ जाना और आना एक पनिशमेंट मिलता था, तो वो पनिशमेंट सबको फॉलो करना होता था, तो उसका जो टाइम लगता था, मान लीजिए कि वो दैट टाइम इज क्लोज टू 10 आवर्स, तो उसने वो काम जो है ना 4 घंटे में कर लिया था। तो इट वॉज वेरी एक्स्ट्रॉर्डिनरी फॉर एवरीबडी कि यार इतने कम समय में कैसे कर गया। तो ये एक इवेंट उसका है। दूसरा था वहाँ पे नोवाइस बॉक्सिंग होती थी, तो नोवाइस बॉक्सिंग में
नोवाइस बॉक्सिंग इज फॉर बॉक्सिंग फॉर पीपल चिल्ड्रन हु डोंट नो बॉक्सिंग।
तो ही वाज चैंपियन देयर कि वो वहाँ भी अच्छा किया था। एनडीए टाइम में उसको एक बार ये भी हुआ था कि उसको जॉइंडिस हो गया था, तो जॉइंडिस के साथ भी उसका मैंने खराब नहीं हुआ एंड ही गॉट ए गुड रैंक टू सेल थ्रू। इनफैक्ट एनडीए में जब वो गया है तो ट्रेनिंग हार्डशिप वो सब रही और हर चीज़ को अच्छे से फॉलो किया एंड ही वाज हैविंग बटालियन कैडेट कैप्टन था
BCC. And now I will request you, since you have read about it and you've been with Rachna Mishra madam, you please read Mr. Pawan Kumar Mishra's book about his classmate and best friend. You will get a lot more from there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry because of the paucity of time. हाँ, please.
आप सब लोग यहाँ पे हैं और ये मेरे लिए बहुत बड़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी है फॉर मी एंड भोपाल इज दिस एमपी इज हार्ट ऑफ कंट्री इंडिया। तो ये एक मनोज पांडे का लास्ट विश था कि उसने एक लास्ट लेटर मुझे लिखा। दिस लेटर वाज रिटन टू मी ऑन 19th of June 1999. I received it on 30th of June. 3rd of July he got martyrdom.
मतलब 4 दिन पहले।
या 4 दिन पहले बस मैं इसको पाया था। और आप इसको ध्यान दिए पावर ऑफ सबकॉन्शियस माइंड क्या होता है, मैं इसको फॉलो करता हूँ। इस लेटर का जवाब मैंने उसको नहीं लिखा, पता नहीं क्यों। मैं इस लेटर को पढ़ता हूँ और इस लेटर को 19 जून को लिखा है, डियर पवन, आप सब लोग ध्यान से सुनिएगा, बहुत ही टचिंग लेटर है, एक फौजी का लेटर देशवासियों के नाम है। 19th of June, डू रीड दिस लेटर टू एज मैनी एज पॉसिबल। ये इसने लिखा है, मैंने एक लेटर, इस लेटर को जनरल साहब को एक पढ़ाया था, तो उन्होंने कहा कि पवन ये लेटर लिखा गया है, लेटर कंप्लीट हुआ है और डू रीड दिस लेटर एज मैनी एज पॉसिबल के फॉन्ट्स छोटे हैं। फॉन्ट्स छोटे मतलब क्या हुआ, लेटर तो उसने लिखा, बाद में लगा कि नहीं ये लेटर तुम्हें नहीं जाना चाहिए, पूरे देश को जाना चाहिए, तो छोटी सी जगह में उसने छोटे फॉन्ट में ये लिख दिया कि शायद मैं मिलूँ या ना मिलूँ, लेकिन तुम इसको दुनिया को पहुँचाना। इट्स अ बिग प्लेटफॉर्म। विद ऑल योर परमिशन सर, मैं इस लेटर को पढ़ना चाहता हूँ।
माइक पास रखिए, माइक पास रखिए।
Yes. Dear Pawan, hi. I received both your letters but could not reply the first one. Both of them reached me in midst of hot battle. It is really difficult to fight the enemy at this altitude. He is well inside bunkers and defenses, and we are in open. He has planned his move very well and has occupied most of the heights. Initially, things were really bad for us, and we suffered most of the casualties. But now, situation is in control, and more planned and deliberate attacks are going on. In last 1.5 months, I have seen the worst in probably Operation Vijay would account for the maximum casualties in the shortest time. I have myself brushed shoulders with death 4 times, but might be because of some good luck, I am still alive. Every day we are receiving the letters from all over countries saying the same sentence, just do it. It is really good to see that at time of need and crisis, our country gets united. I really don't know what would happen at the next moment, but till now, I can assure you and all countrymen that certainly we would push back intruders at whatever cost we have to pay, maybe our lives. This operation has certainly given me some exposure which cannot be quantified, like leading men on the face of death, their fear, their loyalty, and the stress and strain, both physical and mental, which human being can take. But yeah, Indian Army, especially an infantry Jawan, is ultimate. He would do anything, provided led properly. As I have always told you, that what infantry gives you cannot be told. But today, I am so proud of my decision of infantry that I cannot explain. Here weather is cold and snow has started melting down. If sun comes, then days are okay. But nights are cold to the temperature of -5 to -15 degrees centigrade. It all would get over, but the time limit cannot be told. And frankly speaking, no one can say for certainty about his going back. Just one request, guide my brother at this crucial moment of life about his future. Convey my best regard to all your friends for being so considerate to us. Do remain in touch. It gives lot of moral support. If I come back, we would have lot of things to talk about. But certainly this is going to be an everlasting experience for me. Yours, Manoj. Thank you.
I previously said that this session would certainly give you goosebumps, and it was. But all of us are short of words. That letter was certainly made all of us emotional. And I believe this was all about the Kargil gallantry of late Captain Manoj Pandey ji PVC, and that was all about the hero of Metallic. Zordar Taliyan. पवन जी, संजय जी, मैं मंच पे राघव चंद्र सर को बुलाना चाहूँगा, and I would request him to felicitate the author for this session and the discussant for this wonderful session. This session sort of brought all of us together. A painting to the author, Pawan ji, a beautiful painting based on the tribal art made by Padma Shri Bhuribai ji. Beautiful painting. And a mug as well for our discussant Brigadier Sanjay Agrawal ji as a token of love and respect. Zordar Taliyan, thank you so much, Sanjay ji, for carrying out this wonderful discussion in such an enhanced manner. And I would like to request Raghav sir, it's again the quiz time. So अपने कान खोले रखिए, जैसे ही आपको सवाल समझ में आए, जवाब समझ में आए, सवाल समझ में आए, हाथ खड़ा कीजिएगा.
So this book by John Grisham was based on an environmental story about pollution, about birds dying, and it was made into a very famous film starring Julia Roberts. What is the name of that book? Correct. Please claim your book.
What's your good name, sir? दिनकर जी. जोरदार तालियां होनी चाहिए दिनकर जी के लिए.
Bhopal नामा by Untitled Chapter.
Let me remind all of you कि जो आपके फेवरेट ऑथर्स यहाँ पे मौजूद हैं, जो फेवरेट बुक्स आप अपने साथ रखना चाहते हैं, वो सभी बुक्स बाहर स्टोर्स पे अवेलेबल हैं. जी हाँ. एंड मैं आपको बताना चाहूँगा there is one last session we have for this evening. So आप सब विराजमान हो सकते हैं, आप बाकी जो आपके फ्रेंड्स वगैरह उनको यहाँ बुला सकते हैं. मैं आपको बता रहा था कैसे जो बुक्स हैं वो आप रिस्पेक्टिव ऑथर्स से साइन भी करवा सकते हैं. बुक लॉन्च है एंड बुक यस श्योर ओके. एंड नाउ द लास्ट सेशन इज टाइटल्ड एज फैंटेसी स्पोर्ट्स Facts and Fallacies, which is a presentation by Anwar Shirpurwala ji, who happens to be the CEO Federation of India Fantasy Sports. मैं चाहूँगा अनवर साहब का हम स्वागत करें मंच पे, and I would request the visual team to please prepare the presentation. Meanwhile, let me tell you, Anwar ji has over 20 years of cumulative experience is in business development and sales in government and private sector.
We need your presence.
As CEO of MATE from 2012 to 2019, he has been immensely contributing to the growth and development of the association and strived to create a vibrant ICT industry. He transitioned MATE into a proactive organization, creating value groups to effectively cater to the needs of industry. As CEO, since 2019, he is on a mission to create self-sustainable, first ever self-regulatory organization for the fantasy sports industry in India. His key role is to strategize and implement public policies for the development of the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome for the last session of this evening, Shri Anwar Shirpurwala ji on stage. जोरदार तालियों से उनका स्वागत किया जाए.
Anwar, is there an issue?
और अपना सीट मत छोड़िए. Okay, I would request. We were thinking that we'll do a presentation, but after a very emotional, sentimental, engrossing session, we thought that might as well we'll do a good conversation on what we are. And therefore, instead of doing presentation, what we will do is I will request my colleagues to come here. They are from. Let me welcome first Professor Ratnakar Shetty. Professor Shetty. If you play cricket and if you follow cricket, then you would know that Professor Ratnakar Shetty is one of the longest serving administrator of BCCI. He's been the general manager of BCCI, and he's also an advisor to the Federation of Indian Fantasy Sports. I'll talk to you about what that is. Also, I'd like to welcome Mr. Dinkar Vashish. He is the Vice President of a company called as Games 24/7. They have a fantasy sports app called as My 11 Circle, one of the very popular fantasy sports app. So the idea of being here is today to tell you what fantasy sports is, and ये वो fantasies नहीं जो आप सोच रहे हो. This is different. This is fantasy sports. This means that this is something which is virtually played, and it is played only when a real life game happens. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll go and take the seat and we'll do a conversation on this. Yes, thank you. So, I'll give you a very quick brief of what fantasy sports is, and then possibly we'll get into the conversation that we want to do. So what happens is that as a sport fan, आप जो भी sport में आप interest रखते हो, whether it is cricket, football, hockey, whatever sport it is, you always have an expert view. Okay, आपको पता होता है कौन सा player कब कहाँ कैसे खेलना चाहिए to win the match, right? And that is what the fantasy sports app actually bring out that talent of yours. So what it allows you to do is create your own teams with your skill and knowledge, because if you don't know the game, obviously you cannot create that that sort of a team for yourself. So it's an online app. It can be played on a mobile or it can be played on a desktop computer. Popularly it is played on a mobile app. What you have to do is, before any real life match happens or starts, you go and create a team of those players which are actually going to play a match. So let's take an example. IPL आ रहा है. Assume that the first match is between Mumbai and Delhi. Okay, so Mumbai will have 11 players and Delhi will have 11 players. We call it as playing 11 होता है ना, उसको playing 11 कहा जाता है. So from that 11 and 11, 22 players, you actually form a team of your 11 players on the app. Okay, so this is real life. You're just emulating, you're just picking up the same names and creating a team. That's it, your job is done. Now when the match starts, you can't change anything. What happens now is that whatever the real life performance is, based on that, your team gets points. So if Virat is part of your team and Virat hits a 6, you'll get 1 point, for example. Okay, or there's a great bowler, he's taken a wicket, you'll get some points. So based on the entire match, small events, single events of all the match, the points are aggregated, and towards the end of the match, your team has certain points. Now, like you, there would be lakhs of other people who would be doing the same thing. Okay? So your ranking amongst all of them is what makes you win or lose. That's what fantasy sports is all about. So if you can just quickly go to the next slide. I guess since I announced we are not going to do presentation, so no one is there to handle these slides. Never mind. So here it is, like I said. So some of the great things that these platforms provides you is that based on your skill and knowledge, it gives you an opportunity to actually get involved, engage in this in match. So it's just beyond watching now. You're actually playing it. You're actually challenging others who are also on the platform to do the same. Okay. It is absolutely transparent. So if there are 1 million people playing on that same day before a match, you will exactly know who's forming what team. क्या ऐसा unique उन्होंने किया है अपने team में, you'll know. And finally, what happens at the end of the match? जो results आते हैं, like I said, उस basis पे आप win or lose करते हैं. So there is no simulation involved. So this is one unique sort of a platform जिसमें कोई सिमुलेशन नहीं होता है, जिसमें कोई assumptions नहीं होते, जिसमें कोई chance नहीं होता है. This is all based on real life. That's what fantasy sports is about. So today, our objective is basically to give you some interesting information on what fantasy sports is. make you aware of what fantasy sports is, and it's catching up so fast in India that today India has over 15 crore, 150 million users, and these, in fact, let me tell you, it has already surpassed US market. US का user base से ज़्यादा बड़ा India का user base बन गया है fantasy sports, and so anyway, let me start my conversation with both the gentlemen here. And Professor Shetty has been involved with BCCI for many decades. अगर आप लोग बहुत पहले क्रिकेट देख रहे हो तो if you remember सुपर सिलेक्टर करके कुछ हुआ करता था many years ago, जहाँ आप अपनी एक सुपर सिलेक्टर गेम टीम बना सकते थे. So sir, you have been at the helm of this cricket as well as fantasy sports for such a long time. I think it's very important for the audience to really know how this whole thing started, where it is right now, and how the whole thing has shaped up in the last few years, maybe a decade.
Well, I think there was a time when we are all cricket crazy fans in India. That is the biggest sport in India that we follow, and it was only watching matches being played on television. That is what used to happen. And somewhere along the line also there used to be these rumors of betting and other things that used to happen, match fixing, etc. But in 2015, this was already, the fantasy sports was already existing in US markets, and NBA used to be a huge following for that. So that came about in India also, and it was cricket with which it started first basically. And what it did was actually get the people involved with the game. So instead of just watching a cricket match and getting frustrated when India doesn't do well or when your players don't do well, you start following the game yourself, be a party to the game as such at your own leisure. So these apps were started in the markets, and people started playing fantasy sports leagues. I still remember there was a time when it was free play. I mean, play for free. There was no money involved, or you don't have to pay any charges for playing that. I still remember for IPL we used to have fantasy sports introduced, where the winner used to get autographed t-shirts. There was no prize money or cash awards relating to fantasy sports. So fantasy sports in a way has given the people an approach to follow the game more closely, create their own team. That's why it is called fantasy. A dream team that you prepare, and you then see what happens, how your team does at the end of the match. So you are competing with others, your own friends, or a large majority of people who are playing the fantasy sports leagues. That's how the process goes on. Today it is developed into a huge game, and it helps not only cricket but all other leagues also. And I look at it as a source of increasing viewership for the sports in India.
Thank you, sir. Let me tell you one very interesting fact which is attached to fantasy sports is that fantasy sports has actually now led the consumption of sports in India. Simple reason है, because मुझे fantasy sports पे खेलना है, so मैं वो match, वो game देखना start कर दिया है. I was only a cricket fan. अब मैं football भी खेलना चाहता हूँ. तो आज football में team मुझे बनानी, तो I don't know the players, I don't know the game. So people have started watching football. Women's cricket has become such a huge success for fantasy sports. Kabaddi जैसी game is now on the top 3 of the game being played on fantasy sports. So it's very interesting, a lot of things are happening. Let me quickly come to Dinkar, because I'm going to ask him a very extremely important question. They are running one of the largest platforms for fantasy sports. And the biggest challenge is that fantasy sports, online gaming gets confused with a lot of other things. And generally हम न्यूज़ में बहुत सारी रिपोर्ट्स देखते हैं, उसने इतना पैसा डाल दिया, उसका पैसा खत्म हो गया, वो सुसाइड कर दी, ये कर दी. There's so many things happening. So Dinkar, if you could share some light in terms of how do we distinguish what is right, what is wrong, what is the difference between all of this?
Thank you, Anwar. And since we are speaking at a Bhopal Literary Festival, I think it will be customary on my part to start with a quote from the Bard of Avon. When Shakespeare wrote that that what we call rose by any other name would smell as sweet. I think that was neither true in the world of Romeo and Juliet, and nor is it true in the real life, because nomenclature makes a lot of difference. And what Anwar hinted as is that everything is getting categorized under the same nomenclature. The essential nomenclature which is here at the root of the entire dispute is what is a game of skill and what is a game of chance. In the mind of India's apex jurisprudence, that is a jurisprudence of the Supreme Court, what is a game of skill is constitutionally protected as a legitimate business activity under Article 19(1)(g). And what is not a game of skill is akin to gambling, which therefore it is prohibited. Now, fantasy is clearly defined as a game of skill. It is a part of the larger games of skill family. And therefore, by repeated Supreme Court jurisprudence, it has been held that it is a legitimate business activity. However, what happens is that during media discourses, during public narratives, anything which is played for stakes or anything which is played online is construed as akin to gambling, which is not only fallacious, but which is also legally untenable. And I think that differentiation, one could argue that industry has not made sufficient efforts to articulate that distinction. Perhaps to some extent, maybe it has started to do it right now. But I think that distinction has to be effectively conveyed to policymakers, to media, as well as to the civil society.
Thank you, Dinkar. And exactly from that perspective, it's extremely important to be a part of an event like this, because we can clearly see there are a lot of influencers here. So my appeal to all influencers is that now please go out and tell everybody what game of skill is and fantasy sports is. Interestingly, what also has happened in this industry, starting from, and it's been happening for decades, there have been so many court cases. But interestingly, around fantasy sports, there are over a dozen court cases in the past 5 years, which he said definitely spoke about the apex court even recognizing this. While we have all of these court cases, still the country does not have a regulation. And whether it is legal or illegal can only be defined if there is a law. Law hai to legal hai. Law nahi hai to fir kuch hai nahi. So the point, sir, I wanted to ask you is that in such a scenario, when there is an absence of regulation, the government is still grappling with what to do, how to do it, because it's not as simple as it looks. What is it that can be done to ensure that the user interest is protected, that the legitimate industry is able to grow further?
What I think people should know is that the industry itself has formed a self-regulatory body, and consumer protection is a part of that. I still remember in late 2018 when the process started to prepare rules for the industry. For example, the people less than 18 years of age should not be encouraged to play fantasy sports, or the platform should ensure that somebody is not addicted so much that he starts keeping on coming back to your platform to play. So there is also a provision for that, for the platforms to keep track of how people are playing on fantasy leagues on their platforms. There is also a counselor proposal that the platform uses to counsel the people to play the right way on their platforms. So internally the industry has taken a number of steps, and all this is actually to protect not only the youngsters who come and play these games, but also to protect the industry in the larger interest.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Dinkar, you have a point to make here.
So, it's an unfortunate fact, fortunate or it's a realistic fact that technology will always develop faster than the government does. We have seen it in multiple forms. To take some examples from the current context, e-commerce came in India the way we knew it, started in 2007-8, and we are in 2022. Right now also at the Government of India level, we have our third draft policy of e-commerce in India. We don't have a formal regulation for that. Ola and Uber started offering their operations at least 12 years ago. It took at least 9 years before before the new version of Motor Vehicle Act came out and it started regulating them to some extent. Zomato and Swiggy, again a duopoly in food delivery business, has been in existence for now 8 years. But it was only about 2 years ago that the FSSAI came out with a formal set of regulations. Any industry you look, so the point essentially trying to make is that technology will outpace the regulation or the way government is going to think. So that doesn't mean that anything which is new, which is coming to the fore, is going to be delegitimized. The onus is of course upon the government, upon the stakeholders, upon the judiciary to ensure that laws keep pace with the technological development. Because if regulatory systems are in place, if effective regulatory procedures are in place, that facilitates the larger completely and creative destruction, which is good for the business, good for the society, and good for the larger ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, Dinkar. Another important thing which happened was and how the entire landscape changed of people, citizens engaging with platforms during pandemic and lockdowns. हम सब घर में बैठे थे, okay, except for आप लोग फील्ड में क्या कर रहे थे, you know it better, but for most of us, we were sitting at home and the only thing that we had to consume was something on the screen. So, sir, in such, what happened to the industry? Because I know everybody talks about gaming, सब gaming बहुत खेल रहे थे, but I think there is another side to it also.
Yeah, last 2 years were very difficult for the industry as such, because fantasy sports leagues are all dependent on live games. So there were no live games, more or less all games had stopped everywhere because the pandemic had affected all over the world. And as a result, the industry, I think everybody suffered last 2 years. The only thing that happened was the IPL, which was played in UAE. So that was the breathing space that happened for the industry, I would say. But they had to depend on games which were available on television. And it was for the first time last year that new games started getting followed by people in India. For example, there's a craze for basketball being played, and people started taking interest, watching and participating in fantasy sports for even basketball, because there was no other choice left to them. So whatever was available, you play and follow those games.
Well, at least in the 2 years of lockdown, when there were no sporting events, fantasy sports खेल ही नहीं पाए. So technically, जो fantasy हो सकती थी, वो fantasy नहीं हुई during lockdown. So anyway, I think we see a lot of development now happening with respect to regulation, because very recently Prime Minister announced, very clearly mentioned the intent that online gaming is a very big sector for India. It possibly is the next sunrise sector, जैसा हमारा IT हुआ, services हुआ, even online gaming को consider किया जा रहा है is the next big sector. इसमें jobs बहुत create हो रहे हैं, इसमें FDI बहुत आ रहा है, इसमें government को revenue बहुत generate हो rहा hai. So there is a clear vision that Prime Minister has led now, and in fact last couple of months there have been multiple announcements in the government saying that the direction that they want to take. Ministry of INB एक task force already बना रही हैं जिसके ऊपर इसके ऊपर deliberate किया जाएगा and possibly a good regulation will come. Similarly Ministry of IT इसके ऊपर काम कर रही है. So I think clearly बहुत सारी ऐसी चीज़ें हो रही हैं जिसके कारण the industry will get that legitimate recognition that it needs. But I would urge everybody to try this once. It's extremely interesting and you'll love it. It does not consume too much time. That's the reason it is not addictive, because you have to only form a team based on knowledge. And if you think you have 50, 100 rupees in your pocket and you think that you want to try how it works, try the paid format also. Okay. So with this, these were some of the things that we thought we'll speak to you. We're happy to take your questions for any three of us.
Sure. हेलो गुड इवनिंग सर एंड थैंक यू फॉर दिस वंडरफुल डिस्कशन. मेरा क्वेश्चन जो है थोड़ा हटके है. सो मेरा क्वेश्चन है कि रिवेन्यू मॉडल क्या होता है जो ये फैंटेसी प्लेटफॉर्म्स होते हैं, जो ऐप्स होते हैं, व्हाट इज देयर रिवेन्यू मॉडल? लाइक डू प्लेयर्स आर आल्सो इन्वॉल्वड? क्या उसमें प्लेयर्स भी कोई इन्वॉल्व होते हैं या उनमें नहीं होते?
ओके, वेरी गुड क्वेश्चन. थैंक यू फॉर आस्किंग दिस क्वेश्चन. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, प्लेयर्स इन्वॉल्व नहीं होते इसमें. ओके, बिकॉज एक रियल लाइफ मैच हो रही है, हमें पता है वहाँ कौन क्या कर रहा है, बेसिस दैट हम हमारी यहाँ टीम बनाते हैं. ओके. और रेवेन्यू मॉडल की जहाँ तक बात है, फैंटेसी स्पोर्ट्स के अंदर ऐसा होता है कि जब आप कोई कॉन्टेस्ट में एंटर करते हैं, कॉन्टेस्ट बेसिकली होती है जैसा कुछ लोग मिलके एक पर्टिकुलर मैच के साथ इंगेज होना चाह रहे हैं. सो जैसा मैंने दिल्ली मुंबई का एग्जाम्पल लिया, वही एग्जाम्पल लेता हूँ. दिल्ली मुंबई मैच होने वाली है, जैसा आपको इंटरेस्ट है उसके अंदर कॉन्टेस्ट में एंटर करना, किसी और को भी होगा, काफ़ी लोगों को होगा. वो सब फ्री तो ऐसे खेल ही सकते हैं, बट अगर उनको पे करके खेलना है तो दे पे एन एक्स अमाउंट. लेट्स कंसिडर दैट एज 100 रुपीज़. वो 100 रुपीज़ में से 80% goes into a trust account which is called as prize pool. और only 20% जो होता है उसमें से 18 to 20% is what these platforms keep as called as platform fee. ओके. वो जो 80% है वो पूरा डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हो जाता है amongst the winners, and winner is not one, there are winners. Almost 50% of the people who participated in a particular contest, हो सकता है contest 1000 लोग का हो, 1 लाख लोग का हो, 50% को पूरा अमाउंट डिस्ट्रीब्यूट हो जाता है.
सर इफ यू अलाउ वन मोर, इसमें एक क्वेश्चन है कि जो इसमें हमारा अभी तक कोई रेगुलेशन तो है नहीं इसमें गवर्नमेंट की. सो व्हाट आर द टैक्सेस द प्लेटफॉर्म्स पे टू द गवर्नमेंट? डू दे पे एनी टैक्सेस और दे?
सो टैक्सेस और रेगुलेशन का मैं आपको बता दूं, थोड़ा डिफरेंस होता है कि रेगुलेशन हो ना हो, टैक्स के लिए हमेशा यूजुअली स्ट्रक्चर्स अवेलेबल होते हैं. तो ये पर्टिकुलर इंडस्ट्री एक ऑनलाइन कंटेंट की कैटेगरी में आती है, जिसका ऑलरेडी जीएसटी के अंदर बहुत क्लियरली डिफाइंड है कितना टैक्स भरना है, तो उसका टैक्स उतना भरा जाता है. पहली बात. दूसरी बात, दूसरे टैक्सेस भी होते हैं. विनिंग्स, जैसा आप सपोज आपने 100 रुपीज़ डाले और आपने 1000 रुपये जीत लिए फॉर एग्जांपल, तो आपको जब पे आउट्स होते हैं उसके अंदर भी टीडीएस के रूल्स बहुत क्लियर है, तो पे आउट्स के अंदर टीडीएस भी कटा जाता है. तो टैक्सेस इज समथिंग विच द इंडस्ट्री इज वेरी कंप्लायंट. और चूंकि इंडस्ट्री कम्प्लीटली ऑनलाइन है, सो यहाँ तो कुछ हिडन हो ही नहीं सकता. एवरीथिंग इज ऑडिटेबल.
I have a question, Anwar. So, you said that in the last 2 years there hasn't been so much activity. You know, you are an app, and I mean, there's a lot of mathematical science involved, statistical science. So if I'm a statistical genius, I think I'll do very well in it. Unfortunately, I'm not. But why did you find that the level of involvement of people in this sport was less in the last 2 years because of COVID? I mean, how did COVID, what is the correlation between the two?
It is not the last 2 years and it is not COVID. I said 2 years of lockdown. Because world over there were lockdowns, there were no sporting events. And when there is no sporting event...
Okay, so if there's no live event, then this doesn't...
So if there is no live event, you can't play.
So why don't you call yourself a derivative?
Very interesting. It is a derivative actually, but it cannot be called because
there is an underlying platform, there is an underlying sport. You are only a
the only issue is that it's always been called as fantasy sports, and this is something not that we devised.
So I personally feel that, you know, pardon my speaking without a mic, but I think some of the misconception is because of the fact that you're fantasy.
Absolutely right.
If you had called yourself fantasy science and put a small thing, you know, fantasy science instead of fantasy sports, things would have perhaps been, easier.
Just one particular point which you said, and it sounded music to my ears when you said that excellence at this particular game required statistical finesse, and that is actually that is something which is a essence of all skill gaming. In fact, the Indian School of Business, which happens to be my alma mater as well, it ran a very detailed study on a different game of skill, which is Rummy, online Rummy. And there, and it was the study was led by their statistics professor, and in consultation with Deloitte, and it showed that Rummy, when played with seriousness, is a game of skill. Similarly, for fantasy, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology ran again a detailed statistical study, which said that fantasy is a game of skill. It cannot be dependent upon chance.
So, no, the point I'm trying to make is perhaps you should consider, and this is just a layman's suggestion, and you guys deal with it morning till night, and so you're more involved with it, the word science somewhere.
Point well taken, sir.
Science or fantasy sports, or somewhere you must bring that into your branding.
Sure.
Just a suggestion.
Coming from you, definitely it carries a lot of weight. Thank you for that suggestion.
We might have to take at best one question more because the cruise is waiting for us.
One last question.
Sir, good evening, sir. I just wanted to ask, when you have a future of fantasy sports, metaverse, blockchain, why not create a virtual thing? We have fantasy, we have virtual sports. We connect it with fantasy platforms. Even in the United States, there are sports named as pillow fighting that are more popular than the NBA. That is gaining more money than the NBA. Pillow fighting is something people would enjoy. You do it at home, but when you do it in the ring, it's actually becoming more of an entertainment. So why in India we should not go with sports like that? Or slab fighting are there? These are some sports that earn more revenue than the NBA.
I couldn't get your name, please.
Sir, Ekas Singh, Ekas.
Ekas, so that's a very relevant question, and that's a great suggestion. So I think what you're suggesting is that there should be an overall development and proliferation of gaming ecosystem in India. That is something which Honorable Prime Minister has also hinted towards, and that is perhaps at the heart of the Finance Minister in her last budget speech also announcing that she'll set up an AVGC task force. So that's there. But I think before that to happen, we need to clearly define in our minds that we cannot de-hyphenate certain games from that. We cannot say that certain games are bad and certain games are good. For the larger gaming ecosystem to flourish, I think we need the support to the overall sector.
And if I can just supplement a little bit with one sentence to close the evening, is in the entire online gaming space, there are many things happening. Fantasy sports is there, esports is there, cards and dice games are there, casual games are there, and I'm sure I'm missing out something. Quizzes are there. So the whole space is developing, and you should join some gaming company. Your suggestions are required more by the gaming company because metaverse and all that. Let me tell you, AI, ML, metaverse, these are the technologies that these companies have already started adopting.
Connected with a metaverse company and just helping with their branding and some marketing schemes. It's called Loka. It was featured in the Shark Tank India too. So I had a conversation with the founder when actually we had a game of boxing at the Loka. Like we have a boxing, the one who gets it gets more discounts on Decathlon, or he gets a free merchandise of Decathlon or free products worth of Nike. So this is something that we can relate to. Rather than betting it, getting into money, rather than making it more type of gambling, we can make it like more of giving gifts or giving merchandises or something like that to them. That's what that's it.
And for you to start a platform.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for that wonderful conversation. जोरदार तालियां होनी चाहिए insightful discussion के लिए. Thank you so much, अनवर जी, रत्नाकर जी and दिनकर जी. मैं इनवाइट करना चाहूँगा राघव चित्रा सर को. मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूँगी वो मंच पे आएँ एंड फेलिसिटेट करें हमारे ऑथर एंड हमारे डिस्कशंस को with a beautiful painting and some beautiful mugs we have here. A painting, as I previously said, as I previously mentioned, a beautiful tribal art created by Padma Shri Bhavri Bhaiji, a beautiful art as a symbol of love, respect and gratitude from the Society for Culture and Environment, and of course our wonderful discussants, Ratnagar ji or Dinkar ji.
We got started. Could have,
Indeed, it was an interesting discussion. Certainly, fantasy sports is something that is going to be something crucial in the future. And hereby, इस सुहाने पहले दिन के अंत पे हम आ चुके हैं। भोपाल लिटरेचर आर्ट फेस्टिवल 2022 का बेहतरीन आरंभ हुआ है। एंड कल सुबह 10 बजे से आप फिर से यहाँ पे आइए। आप देख पाएंगे एथनिक फैशंस ऑफ भोपाल एंड इट्स बेगम्स व्हिच विल बी प्रेजेंटेड टू यू बाय मुमताज खान जी एंड वर्तुल सिंह जी, और ऐसे ही काफ़ी बेहतरीन सेशंस आप कल देख पाएंगे। BLF 2022 की तरफ से मैं आप सभी का धन्यवाद देता हूँ कि आप यहाँ पे रहे। Till then, enjoy yourselves. I wish कि कल आप सबको इसी तरह मुस्कुराते हुए देखेंगे यहीं पर। Have a very great night and see you tomorrow. Thank you so much everyone.